In a hidden corner of reality, where time and space intertwine, there exists a vast invisible ocean, a primordial ether that connects everything we know with what lies beyond our comprehension. It is a mysterious domain, filled with forgotten secrets and knowledge, a realm where the laws of physics seem to dissolve, and where human consciousness expands beyond the limits of reason. The Secrets of the Ether, the legacy of Max Heindel, invites us to dive into this vast, invisible ocean and explore the mysteries lying within the etheric currents that surround us. On this fascinating journey, we will immerse ourselves in the depths of the spiritual universe, where matter and energy merge in a cosmic ballet, and where we will discover that everything that exists, every thought, every emotion, every action leaves an imprint on the subtle vibrations of the ether. Throughout this text, we will delve into the hidden secrets of creation, the invisible forces that shape our destiny, and the guiding principles that lead us toward a deeper understanding of the cosmos. What once seemed like an intangible and distant world is revealed to us as a living, pulsating reality, waiting to be understood. Are you ready to discover what lies beyond the visible, to learn the secrets the ether holds for those brave enough to seek the truth? Join us on this transcendental adventure, where every word, every teaching will take us one step closer to unveiling what only a few have been able to sense, and many others have feared to know. This is a journey into the unknown. This is the secrets of the ether. The eyes have been the gateway to the visible world. The eyes have served as a gateway to the visible world. Yet in their limited nature, they have concealed more than they have revealed. Humanity, in its infinite quest to unravel the mysteries of existence, has intuited that beyond matter, beyond form, lies a subtle web of invisible forces. These vibrant and incessant energies constitute the true fabric of reality, the ethereal architecture upon which the phenomenal world is built. This work is not merely a treatise, it is a map leading to these veiled dimensions. It is not an instruction manual, but a beacon illuminating the shadows of ordinary perception. Through its pages, the mystery of the ether is unveiled, that primordial substance that permeates the cosmos and animates life. The author, an initiate in the occult sciences, meticulously outlines the anatomy of the various etheric levels: the chemical ether, the vital ether, the luminous ether, and the reflective ether, each playing an essential role in the dance of existence. Yet this knowledge is not just an intellectual exercise, but a calling. Those who have glimpsed the delicate boundary between the visible and the invisible understand that knowledge carries responsibility. The etheric vision that begins to emerge in the modern psyche is both a blessing and a challenge. As humanity advances toward the age of Aquarius, the perception of subtle worlds will no longer be the privilege of a few, but a collective awakening. With it, the veils of ignorance will fall, making it impossible for individuals to hide their true nature behind the mask of appearances. There will be no refuge but truth, no escape but the acceptance of our own luminous essence. In a world where cosmic forces are intensifying, consciousness is expanding, allowing us to glimpse the vast network of energies that surround us. Those who learn to see with the eyes of the spirit will understand that life is not only what meets the eye, but a field of interconnected forces, a river of vibrations flowing ceaselessly. Thus, this book is a portal to a broader reality, not a text to be read and forgotten, but a threshold to be crossed. Those who venture into its pages will discover that the knowledge of ether is not merely a key to expanded perception, but a path toward understanding the great mystery of existence. Etheric Vision and What It Reveals, Max Heindel. We have noticed that over 90% of those who visit our channel are not subscribed. You can support this project by pressing the subscribe button and liking the video. Thank you for inspiring us to continue creating more and better content for you. Are you ready to transform your life? In 1918, Max Heindel wrote about the preparation process for the age of Aquarius, stating that this era, being an airy, scientific and intellectual sign, would bring a new faith rooted in reason, capable of resolving the enigma of life and death in a way that satisfies both the mind and the religious instinct. Just as we have developed 5 senses to connect with the visible world, in the distant future, we will develop another sense that will allow us to see the inhabitants of the etheric region, including our loved ones who have left their physical bodies and now dwell in the ether and lower desire world in the early stages of their spiritual journey. Aquarius governs the ethers, The great flood that sank the ancient continent of Atlantis, described in the biblical story of Noah, removed much of the moisture from the atmosphere. However, when the sun enters Aquarius by precession, even more moisture will dissipate, intensifying visual vibrations that travel more easily through a dry, etheric atmosphere. This will create conditions favorable for the gradual extension of human vision, opening our eyes to the etheric realm. The increasing number of psychics in California is an example of the effects of a dry, electrically charged atmosphere. Though it is not yet as dry as it will be in the age of Aquarius, those who aspire to this expanded perception can accelerate their development through aspiration and meditation. In contrast, those unaware of these changes may delay their etheric vision by dismissing early perceptions as hallucinations or fearing they will be judged insane. Thus, the Rosicrucian Fellowship has been entrusted by the Elder Brothers with the mission of spreading the gospel of the age of Aquarius, carrying out an educational campaign to prepare humanity for what lies ahead. The world must be enlightened with these ideas. The conditions in the land of the so-called dead are not mysterious. Their knowledge is as accessible as foreign lands through the accounts of travelers. We are approaching a threshold where these truths will become evident. Most importantly, we can accelerate this awakening by acquiring knowledge of post-mortem existence and the phenomena we can expect to encounter. This awareness will prevent fear, shock, or disbelief when we begin to perceive these realities. Yet as wondrous as these developments may be, they come with responsibility. Students of esoteric wisdom must realize that possessing knowledge entails a great duty. To whom much is given, much is required. If we bury our talents, we cannot expect to avoid just consequences. The Rosicrucian Fellowship can only fulfill its mission if each member commits to spreading these teachings and living the spiritual life. This duty is not about building grand institutions or amassing wealth, but about disseminating wisdom and preparing the world for the next evolutionary step in human consciousness. Our duty in the new era. Our duty is simply to spread the truths related to the new era in whatever way circumstances determine. We do not need to mention the word Rosicrucian or the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. However, if we are asked about the source of our knowledge, it is both our privilege and our duty to tell the truth and share our spiritual background. Of course, we should not force our views upon unwilling ears. Today, psychiatric hospitals are filled with cases of so-called nervous and mental breakdowns, which are in reality people suffering from exposure to psychic forces they do not understand. As a result, they become nervous, emotionally drained, and overcome with fear. These conditions are caused by overstimulation of the great solar plexus nerve center before the higher brain centers have sufficiently developed to provide control. We mention this only in passing as a symptom of the increasing sensitivity brought about by the approach of the age of Aquarius. It is not only the solar plexus that receives stimulation from cosmic forces, but also other nerve centers, including the optic nerve and brain areas related to vision, specifically the extended vision associated with the etheric region. Etheric vision normally depends on the sensitivity of the optic nerve. However, even when the optic nerve is defective or destroyed, etheric vision may develop through alternative neural pathways. It is said that much of the defective vision present today is due to the increasing densification of the ethers, which is part of the overall effect of solar radiation. When the sun moves closer to Aquarius at the spring equinox by precession, etheric sight will become more common. Through etheric vision, it is possible to see everything that exists in the etheric region of the physical world. When this sight first develops, it reveals the lowest ether, the chemical ether, which varies in color from blue-gray to deep violet or nearly black. Max Heindel describes the chemical ether as dark or almost black due to the interaction of other ethers within it. Depending on their density, these ethers may also appear reddish-blue, magenta, violet, or purple. When someone perceives an object with etheric sight, they see through it in a manner similar to how X-rays penetrate solid matter, hence the term X-ray vision, though this is not entirely accurate. The observer first sees the outermost layer, then the adjacent inner layers, and finally the farthest side of the object. One may develop higher degrees of vision, such as astral or mental sight, and yet lack etheric vision. With etheric sight, one can see through books, papers, letters, walls, or any other object for a short distance. In the age of Aquarius, when etheric vision becomes widespread, studying anatomy will become much easier. Doctors will be able to directly observe anatomical structures and physiological processes without obstruction, allowing them to detect diseases, dislocations, and pathological conditions with ease. As the new era progresses and the masses develop etheric sight, it will become nearly impossible for people to lead double lives, behaving one way in public and another at home. If we were currently aware of the invisible entities that swarm in our homes, we would often feel ashamed of our actions and words. These various beings that fill the air are attracted to people of similar nature, whether good or bad. Lower evolved entities lack the intelligence to maintain a disguise for long and must eventually reveal their true nature. Whether visible or not, etheric entities feed on the vital ether of those to whom they are drawn. If they remain within a person's aura, they not only influence them toward negativity, but also weaken their vital body, leading to nervous exhaustion, partial possession, or obsession. It is as impossible to clear one's aura of such entities without complete moral and emotional purification as it is to eradicate malaria without draining the swamps where mosquitoes breed. When the atmosphere is filled with such entities, they will unmistakably reveal the psychic and mental impurity of those who harbor them. In the new era, when nearly everyone has the power to see these beings, there will be no way to hide one's true character. Privacy will be nearly impossible, as anyone who wishes to see us will be able to do so. It will no longer be effective to send a messenger to tell an unwanted visitor that we are unavailable. This means that in the new era, honesty and transparency will be the only policies worth following, for wrongdoing will no longer go unnoticed. There will always be individuals drawn to evil, both now and in the future, but at least they will be exposed. Regarding etheric vision, Max Heindel further states, MS 591A2, that experience has shown that afflicted stellar rays from certain parts of the zodiac interfere with etheric vibrations perceived by the retina, thereby impairing physical sight. If Neptune is focused through one of these regions in the natal chart, the so-called blind spot in the eye, which is normally inactive, may become sensitized by Neptune's spiritual ray affecting vision. That is, the spinal spiritual fire. Thus, it is possible for a person who is physically nearsighted or even blind to see the spiritual worlds that remain hidden from those whose vision is focused through mercurial vibrations in the nerves governed by Mercury. Again, in Letters to Students P. 82, we do not see physical objects outside the eye. They are reflected onto the retina, and we only perceive their image inside the eye. Since light is the agent of reflection, objects that resist the passage of light appear opaque. Other substances, like glass, seem clear because they easily admit light rays. When spiritual sight is used, a light of superlative intensity is generated within the body, between the pituitary and pineal glands. This light is then focused through the so-called blind spot of the eye directly onto the object under investigation. The reach of this direct ray is entirely different from that of the physical reflected ray. It penetrates a wall without difficulty. Recent discoveries suggest that the function of the retina is more analytical and selective than previously believed, but this does not affect the correctness of the above statements. On etheric sight, the chemical ether within the human body and the etheric region of the Earth's planetary envelope are integral parts of the physical Earth itself. They are not spiritual, except in the sense that all living matter is an expression of God's beauty and wisdom. The etheric region is commonly called the lowest of the invisible spiritual regions, and etheric sight is often considered the lowest form of spiritual vision. Though it may be the lowest, it reveals a world beyond the limits of physical sight, a magical realm for those fortunate enough to behold it. There are several types of vision beyond normal physical sight. As mentioned before, etheric sight depends partly on the sensitization of the optic nerve. It also requires a certain degree of looseness between the etheric and physical bodies. In primitive races, this looseness allows entire populations to experience some degree of etheric vision. As a result, the existence of fairies and spirits is never doubted, and both white and black magic flourish. These individuals are so sensitive to psychic forces that, when targeted by occult practitioners, they have been known to lie down and die without any discernible physical cause. This condition occurs because their etheric body is expelled, either partially or entirely from the physical body, as also happens in hypnosis. In one case, a person holding the hand of a young girl from a more primitive race through a small effort of concentration and without intending to, expelled the etheric double from the girl's hand and arm. The result was that her arm became cold, damp, and lifeless. This girl was very intelligent, demonstrating that the looseness of the etheric body does not imply intellectual weakness. In fact, primitive races with such characteristics are often quite mentally sharp. Hypnotism should not be confused with mesmerism or magnetism. There are actual magnetic currents that flow through the vital body, visible as radiant lines of force, which can be perceived as electric in nature. When concentrated through an act of will, they become dense and almost physically tangible. Many people have observed what they call magnetic rain in the atmosphere. However, this falling magnetic force is not the same as the cosmic rays of modern physics. It can be controlled by human will, unlike cosmic rays as far as we currently understand, and can be directed in various ways. Magnetic forces are connected to the biological processes of life. They are not merely electromagnetic, though they clearly operate within that realm, as shown by laboratory experiments proving that nerve currents are a form of electricity. Occult science had already demonstrated, long before physical science explored the subject, that the forces flowing through the nervous system are electromagnetic in nature, and that their depletion or blockage can lead to paralysis. It is this magnetic aura that modern biology is investigating, in which every organ of the body has its positive and negative poles. Some, like the heart, have more than one set of poles. The heart, for instance, has 12 alternating positive and negative poles. Again, it is this magnetic aura that holds the molecules of the body in their organic patterns. The invisible helper is sometimes aware of these magnetic currents flowing through the inner planes when awakened outside the body at night. Many individuals who have developed a slight degree of etheric vision have expressed amazement at witnessing for the first time showers of stars, pyramids, double pyramids, cubes, and other geometric shapes emerging from the body. These figures are the discarded molecules that the body sheds, excreted through the action of the body's radiant vital forces. Students interested in analyzing these figures may consult scientific journals and books detailing the molecular structure of matter. There, they will find that each molecule has its own characteristic atomic structure, which occult researchers have long described, using different terminology. Notably, these microscopic crystals appear to have actual size and shape when seen with etheric vision. Sometimes they appear in large clusters, which explains why early clairvoyants struggled to describe what they saw using laboratory science terms. Only in the 20th century, with the development of atomic and nuclear physics, has this become possible. The four ethers and classical elements. In occult science, the chemical, vital, light, and reflecting ethers correspond to the four classical elements: fire, earth, air, and water. As previously mentioned, a new table of elements will undoubtedly be needed to accommodate modern scientific advancements. However, for the lay person, the ancient classification remains useful. The chemical ether corresponding to the earth element is the ether through which sustaining and nourishing forces act upon the body. This process includes the elimination of harmful substances, which occurs through the negative pole of the chemical ether, as stated in the cosmoconception. Meanwhile, strengthening and nourishing forces act through the positive pole. When food has been digested and enters the bloodstream, it is visible to etheric vision as a mass of ether flowing along magnetic force lines. Without this etheric counterpart to the physical blood chemistry, the food we consume would be of no benefit to the body. There are deep points within the body where, from the perspective of etheric vision, the blood appears to be almost entirely gaseous. But biological science, of course, has not yet found any evidence of this, partly because biologists do not expect to find such a condition, and partly because their instruments are not suited for its discovery. The gaseous aspect of blood could only be discovered in a living, intact body. X-rays cannot reveal it, nor can any of the other rays currently available to physicists. The toxins that accumulate in the bloodstream are visible to etheric sight as a black miasma that hangs in curls around afflicted areas. To the etheric sense of touch, this black miasma feels heavy, and in fact the sensation of heaviness that accompanies illness is partly due to the accumulation of large masses of black ether in the body. Water washes away much of it, which is why baths provide a feeling of lightness and rejuvenation. However, when the body is ill, it continues to generate these toxic ethers, which then obstruct the passage of clean solar magnetism, or what is called solar ether. This is particularly true in the root center of the nose, which becomes clogged with miasma to a superlative degree. When, through spiritual healing and etheric manipulation by the invisible helper, this obstruction is broken, there is immediate improvement. The dense miasma in the vital body also plays a role in blocking the opening of etheric vision, as it hampers the activity of the etheric force centers. As the ethers become denser and form a black miasma, the rest of the vital body becomes attenuated, since the physical body is drawing upon it. Just as in starvation, the body consumes stored fat, leaving it emaciated. Actual holes develop in the etheric structure, demonstrating that energy is no longer being specialized by the vital body. It is evident that the black miasma belongs to the chemical ether, which, as mentioned earlier, normally varies in color from grayish-blue to violet-blue, and even to a dark blue that is almost black, depending on the density of the ethers. Several individuals have seen this ether as a blue glove over the hand, as a blue aura in which the body is embedded, or as diffuse blue flames, resembling a low gas flame appearing along the surfaces of walls. Physicists have now presented photographs of free electrons, and these free electrons appear as blue flames, perhaps not exactly as described by those with etheric vision, but similar enough to suggest that chemical ether very likely consists of atomic particles, existing in a state yet undiscovered by physical science. Not just electrons alone, but an amalgam of particles. This chemical ether would be a kind of vital plasma, as shown in Max Heindel's description of the etheric food current, moving in or with the blood. A great number of people see small points in the air that resemble golden or silver dust, or sometimes multicolored specks, which at times move in large, cloud-like masses before their vision. Ancient seers have described such clouds, from which the spirits of ancestors would condense and materialize before the physical eyes. This, again, is a vision of chemical ether as it appears in the materialization of etheric formations into the physical realm. The term plasma has several definitions in modern science. Blood plasma, the liquid component of blood used in transfusions. A state of matter that, when heated to high temperatures, becomes an exceptionally good conductor of electricity. A highly ionized gas that emits a pinkish glow, as seen in nebulae, where radio waves can travel at a phase velocity greater than the speed of light in that medium. When microwaves are sent through a plasma of ionized gas, the increase in velocity is a measure of the density of free electrons. Astronomers, similarly to the third definition, describe a kind of magnetic cloud in interplanetary space, where positive and negative particles are suspended, though the cloud as a whole is electrically neutral. The third and fourth definitions closely resemble states that occultists refer to as etheric. Without delving into atomic structure, which in any case requires specialized knowledge, it is evident that a rough correlation can be drawn between the four ethers and various atomic forces currently known. Most of an atom's mass resides in the nucleus, which is composed of a complex of forces or particles. The heaviest among them are first the proton, which is 1,836 times the weight of an electron, and then the neutron, which, as its name suggests, is neither positive nor negative. Both protons and neutrons are called nucleons because they are part of the nucleus. Even smaller particles have been discovered, some within the nucleus and others moving through space. Scientists are searching among them for the binding force of the nucleus, which, as we have seen, is not entirely positive as once believed, since it is composed of more than just the positively charged proton. The first widely accepted atomic model compared the atom to the solar system. According to this early concept, the proton occupied the position of the sun with a positive charge, while electrons orbited around it like planets around the sun. Electrons carry a negative charge. However, it is now suggested that, very possibly, given that the electron behaves as both a wave and a particle, and is described as a bundle of energy, the electron may actually be a wave that completely surrounds the central nucleus, which itself contains a complex of particles and forces. Although several schematic models have been proposed to represent atomic structure, all still require verification. It may be that the old solar system model still has its usefulness. Additionally, physicists now say that the Earth's electron aura extends to the Moon, meaning that the Moon is, in effect, inside the Earth's electronic atmosphere. This is an obvious reaffirmation of the occult maxim that the Earth's etheric body extends to the Moon and includes it, serving as the channel for the continuous magnetic interaction between the Moon and the Earth, particularly concerning its influence on the growth of living organisms on Earth. Etheric vision reveals both molecules and atoms, as well as the forces enclosed within atoms, along with other forces and particles. Occult scientists have described them as best they could, but their vocabulary is not that of modern science. Until a nuclear physicist develops etheric vision, or an occult scientist becomes trained in nuclear physics, students will struggle to equate their occult knowledge with modern physics and chemistry. Some scientists have admitted to possessing extrasensory perception. For instance, the discoverer of the benzene ring saw the structure of molecules in a dream, or something he called a dream. He said, "The atoms began to perform acrobatics before my eyes. I saw how two smaller ones often joined together to form a pair, how two larger ones grasped two of the smaller ones, and how an even larger one held three or even four of the smaller ones. I saw how they all moved in vortices. I observed how the larger ones formed a row, and how the smaller ones were drawn alongside the chain. I spent the night transferring at least sketches of each of these dream images onto paper. Thus, the theory of structure was born." The benzene theory had a similar origin. The atoms once again performed tricks before my eyes. The smaller groups modestly remained in the background. The eye of my mind, trained by repeated visions of a similar kind, now distinguished larger shapes of various forms. Long chains connected, becoming much thicker, all in a serpentine and swirling motion. And what was that? One of the serpents seized its own tail. I awoke as if struck by lightning. Once again, I spent the rest of the night working out the consequences of this hypothesis. Max Heindel has stated in many places that the great initiates of the mystery schools are working with modern scientists and have always done so in the past. For example, with the alchemists during the Middle Ages. Here is an example of inner plane assistance given to a modern scientist whose prestige is indisputable. Other scientists have also been aided by their nascent clairvoyance. Generally, this is of a purely intellectual nature, a form of enlightened reasoning. But occasionally one glimpses the atomic structure of matter with etheric vision for a brief moment, yet does not dare to publish it to the world. What is the relationship between molecules and atoms and the magnetic aura spoken of by occultists, which science is just beginning to explore? We find ourselves on the threshold of the second of the four ethers, the vital ether. However, before proceeding, let us review what Rosicrucian philosophy teaches us about the etheric envelope of our planet. The etheric sheath of the human organism is in fact a miniature replica of the Earth's etheric sheath. It represents the planet in the same way that a drop of seawater represents the ocean. The physical Earth is surrounded and penetrated by an invisible globe that extends into space far beyond the atmosphere, traditionally as far as the Moon, which is included within Earth's etheric envelope. This is Earth's vital body. This globe is composed of ether, of which there are 4 degrees. The densest is called chemical ether and is closest to the Earth. Next is vital ether, then luminous ether, and finally, the rarest and most subtle called reflecting ether. Ether is substantial but not physical in the sense that matter as we know it is. However, to the trained clairvoyant, it is as tangible as the solids, liquids, and gases of common experience. Within these ethers, the clairvoyant sees the forces that give life to the mineral forms, plants, animals, and humans. The etheric bodies of all beings on Earth participate in the cosmic forces flowing through the planetary vital body. The vital body has no power of its own. It is the channel through which the sun's vital forces enter the physical body, and also the conduit through which the dynamic energy of the desire body acts upon the physical inciting activity. The vital body determines the direction in which a given force is used, but that force must be supplied from outside or from above if we think in terms of higher spiritual, mental, and psychic forces. Just as the Earth's sheath has its positive and negative poles in each layer, from chemical ether to reflecting ether, reflected physically as the globe's magnetic poles, so too does each level of the human etheric body have its positive and negative poles, manifesting in opposite polarity in the two sexes. Chemical ether is predominantly positive in the male structure and negative in the female. The organs of the physical body each have their own magnetic field within the etheric body, generally with at least one pair of poles, and some with more than one. We have demonstrated that chemical ether is the medium for the manifestation of chemical forces, which cause crystal formation, poetically described as the loves and hatreds of atoms. Other forces within this ether promote assimilation, excretion, and growth. The color of chemical ether is a deep violet or indigo, sometimes amethyst or purple. It appears clear and transparent in its normal state, but darkens to black when carrying disease, at which point it is called miasma. Miasma is so dense that it is tangible even to people without particular occult development. Max Heindel described a case of illness in which a black miasma enveloped the patient's throat like a collar. He also described it as hanging in tendrils from the body, exuding from the magnetic atomic vortices of the afflicted person's vital body. The forces acting through and within chemical ether will be described in a future discourse. However, we can say in passing that these forces include living intelligences, a class of nature spirits generally called gnomes in folklore, as well as higher intelligences that direct their activities, including angels and the spirits of those we call the dead. In common language, people sometimes refer to magnetism when they actually mean the ether of the vital body itself. Etheric healers speak of casting off magnetism when they mean that diseased ethers are being drawn out of the patient's vital body and cast downward. This is not scientifically accurate, as the student will understand from our discussion of the two lower ethers, but it is a common phrase that must be understood in its popular sense. Max Heindel states that this miasma, when extracted from the patient's body, is subject to gravity and can be burned in fire or washed away by water. To spiritual vision, it appears as a dark or black gelatinous fluid, lying quivering and glistening on the ground. If the patient, now relieved, rises and passes through the place where this magnetism was cast off, the miasma will re-enter the body, leaving them in worse condition than before. Part 2. The Vital Ether and Genetics. The vital ether is the medium for the operation of forces whose primary objective is the functioning of the species, in human terms, the construction of new racial forms. The cosmic force acting in the vital ether is the third principle of divinity, the creative energy of God. The lesser forces working in this ether include the solar-lunar race god, Jehovah, who works with planets that have moons, although its cosmic focus is the solar orb. Other forces include the spirit of the archangelic race reincarnated, the ego itself incarnate, nature spirits, angels and archangels, and spirits belonging to the life wave of plants, including the group spirits of plants. Minerals generally do not possess a vital ether. Like the other ethers, the vital ether has two poles, positive and negative. The positive pole predominates in the female structure, and the negative pole predominates in the male structure. The reason for this is that the woman requires the extra portion of creative energy for the use of the child body of the incoming ego. The forces that act on the positive pole are those that work within the woman during gestation, allowing her to perform the positive and active work of giving birth to a new living form. The forces that act along the negative pole of the vital ether allow the man to produce semen, in which the sperm containing the seed atom of the dense body of the incoming ego is deposited by angels. Angels are the guardians and custodians of the seed atoms of plants, animals, and humans. When they work with animals, angels are assisted by the mother's desire body. When they work with humanity, they are further aided by the desire body of the incarnate ego, when the ego is ready to seek rebirth. The recording angels determine the sex of the body in which the ego will function during that particular earthly life, and the archetype is formed accordingly. The factor that determines sex is the law of alternation, unless this law is modified by specific circumstances established by the ego in previous earthly existences. Therefore, sex is determined before the etheric matrix, made of chemical ether and vital ether, is constructed. The law is this: when the vital ether matrix of the incarnate ego is positive, it attracts negative chemical ether and physical atoms through the agency of forces working along the positive pole of the vital ether, and the dense body will be female. When the vital ether matrix is negative, it attracts positive chemical ether and physical atoms through the agency of forces working along the negative pole of the vital ether, and the dense body will be male. This process begins in the womb with the fertilized egg, which is the body itself. At this stage, the incarnate ego hovers near its future mother, clothed with the embryonic sheath of the mind and desire body, while the matrix is placed in the mother's womb by the angels. After the seed atom has been deposited in the mother's body and conception occurs, the fertilized egg remains outside for a period of 18 to 21 days, while the mother's desire body is working on the embryonic dense body. For the occult scientist, all elements of inheritance reside in the vital ether and are manipulated by invisible intelligences. Although the human being assists, secondary sexual characteristics are also the product of forces acting through the positive and negative poles of the vital ether. It is important to note that sexual characteristics are not limited to the primary reproductive functions of the body, but each cell in the body shows a difference in sex. For example, every cell in the female body has 23 pairs of chromosomes, each pair identical. In the male body, each cell contains a pair that is asymmetrical, that is, different. The 23rd pair of chromosomes are the sex chromosomes, which in the female body are identical and described as 2 X chromosomes. In the male body, the 23rd pair consists of 2 different chromosomes, X and Y. The Y chromosome is the one that determines the masculinity of the body. Until 1957, it was believed that there were 48 chromosomes, 24 pairs, within human body cells. But that year, a new type of microscope revealed that there are actually only 46 chromosomes, or 23 pairs. It is important to emphasize that this refers to all body cells, not just gametes, reproductive cells. Certain cells are reserved in the reproductive organs at the beginning of the incarnation process with the specific purpose of perpetuating the species. Though these cells divide, they do so less frequently than other body cells, and they remain fresh when the work of reproduction begins. Their method of division is also different from that of other cells, meiosis versus mitosis, allowing for variety in the transmission of hereditary elements, as these are drawn from 2 people rather than just 1. This enables numerous combinations. When the reserve cell divides into 2, it forms the gametes, commonly known as eggs and sperm. Eggs each contain 1 X chromosome, while sperm contain either 1 X or 1 Y chromosome. Additionally, each gamete contains only half the number of chromosomes found in a normal cell, but when the 2 gametes unite, the resulting fertilized egg returns to the full number of chromosomes. Chromosomes carry tiny formations called genes, which are the true agents of inheritance. Since each chromosome can have up to 1,000 genes, the incarnate ego has around 46,000 genes, half from each parent. Thus, the genetic template or pattern is fixed in the original cell, which continues dividing in the usual manner of body cells to form the new organism that will house a human spirit. Femininity appears to be the basic condition, with the Y chromosome adding the male element. Compare with diagram 13 from Cosmoconception, page 364. Under the microscope, genes appear as small cross-banded shapes on the thread-like chromosomes, sometimes compared to beads. It is said that they are nature's molds that ensure a particular creature fits the pattern of its ancestors. Of special interest to the occultist is the claim that the gene is perhaps a kind of missing link between living and non-living matter, which is why it is also called the living molecule. So perhaps we can begin to draw the line at this point between the common molecule, which belongs to the realm of chemical ether, and the living molecule, which belongs to the realm of vital ether. The gene is the smallest unit of living matter. However, it also possesses characteristics of complex molecules, like proteins, which are subject to all known laws of chemistry. It is estimated that a gene has about 1 million atoms. Occultists say that genes and chromosomes are deposited by forces working in the vital ether. Asterisk, asterisk. Therefore, the 2 lower ethers essentially form a vital or life body that acts as a matrix in terms of a force mesh, in which the atoms of the body are collected into a living pattern or organism. It is taught that blood and ductless endocrine glands are, in a special sense, the highest product of the vital body, and among the ductless glands, the pituitary gland located in the head is, in the words of modern biophysicists, the most powerful sexual organ of the body. Its secretions govern fertility cycles in both men and women. It is the focus of the spirit of life, the Christ macrocosm in man, which is a fire principle of health and healing. The vital body as a whole is the reflection or emanation, even we could say condensation, of the same principle. All the hormones secreted and released into the bloodstream by the ductless glands are expressions of the vital ether, but those such as the pituitary gland and the gonads, which secrete sexual hormones, are especially so. as they actively participate with the genes and chromosomes in the reproductive cycles of both the individual and the race. Eventually, the cosmic Christ life must necessarily replace the principle of the Jehovah race in its entirety. The number of chromosomes in each cell differs from one species to another. Only the human body contains 46 chromosomes. The development and virtually all the properties of the adult organism are determined by the set of hidden genes in each chromosome of each cell in the body. Every animal or plant grows around its genes. This has been compared to how a piece of inorganic matter is formed. Certain atomic nuclei that carry a charge of 6 positive electric units will be surrounded by atomic shells of 6 electrons each, causing the atoms to arrange themselves in a regular hexagonal pattern, forming the crystals we call diamonds. Needless to say, even the simplest living organism is much more complex than a diamond, but in both cases, we have the typical phenomenon of macrocosmic organization determined to the last detail by the microscopic centers or organizing activity. It is rightly said that the laws of inheritance exhibit a simplicity and mathematical clarity that suggest we are dealing with one of the fundamental phenomena of life. 5. The spiral of life. What physical science has to say about the vital forces of the human organism has already been shown. We take note again that the carbon atom is the axis of the chemical process of life. In the words of the scientist, while the structure of the universe depends on hydrogen, the structure of life depends on carbon. Carbon is the essential building block upon which all living beings are constructed. Why should this be the case? Life requires atoms that have the ability to form exceptionally large molecules. What gives the carbon atom this special property of adhering to other atoms on such a large scale? It seems like an ordinary atom that stands out by having 6 planetary electrons, while boron and nitrogen, its neighbors on the atomic table, have 5 and 7 electrons, respectively. However, the carbon atom is unique. This is due to its peculiar structure. It is known as a tetravalent atom because it has a power of 4 in forming atom combinations, compared to others that have more or less. It is this quality that gives the carbon atom its immense potential to create more complex structures. In fact, the number of possible compounds based on this versatile atom amounts to millions. For centuries, occult science has spoken of the diamond body of the adept, or the adept himself as the living diamond. Here in modern biochemistry, a hint of revelation shines as this carbon atom, which plays such a crucial role in the process of life, is the very same element with which nature formed the diamonds long ago in the rocky strata of the primordial earth. The diamond is the symbol of immortality, but it is more than a symbol, it is a promise. Behind the diamond were the energies of the sun's rays, the pressure of the masses of rock, and the heat of the still young earth. The same forces are present in the human organism, though in another form, and they overshadow the ultimate destiny of human beings. In popular thought, fire and water are considered opposites, but in occult chemistry, they are actually complementary. Thus, it is not surprising to discover that closely connected to the vital ether is the colorless solar ether or solar fluid, which pours through the center of the vessel of the etheric body. The vital ether is the specific pathway for the specialization of this solar fluid, says Max Heindel. Now, just as there exists a universal vital fire or macrocosm called the vital spirit, which is the Christ principle, there also exists visible macrocosmic magnetism, seen with the etheric sight as a kind of rain that appears to fall in slanted lines toward the earth. Many people have witnessed this fall of cosmic force without knowing what they were seeing. It is not the same as the cosmic rays of modern science, although, since the sun is a star and stars are all suns, there is no reason to assume that this solar ether does not include forces emanating from distant stars and nebulae, as well as from our sun. Matter and light imply electromagnetic phenomena, and so does life, as biologists are now discovering. The so-called sexual force is generated in the vital ether, as the solar or cosmic force precipitates through the vessel. The cosmic magnetic rain is colorless like water, and just as rain consists of separate drops of water, this magnetic rain consists of separate units of force. Moreover, it has an affinity with water, and Mesmer discovered that the oceans are charged with what he called solar magnetism, and the same is true of lakes, rivers, and streams. Of course, the human body, highly magnetic, reveals its origin in the primordial seas, in the fact that it is more than 80% water. Mesmer also said that the sun was a great Yah, which modern astronomy now verifies. The boundaries of astronomy. Today, plants are rich in vital ether, just as certain animal products, such as fresh cow's milk, still warm from milking. Most human needs are satisfied through the consumption of plant foods to which magnetism enters via the vessel. One day, humans will no longer need to sustain themselves with plant foods, but will receive sustenance directly from the cosmic energy field itself. The universal magnetism precipitates through the vessel to the seed atom of the vital body located in the solar plexus. From there, it makes its way through the body, radiating through the nerves. Without these magnetic currents, the body could not function and would be inert, like an electrical machine with the current turned off. The activity of the vital body, separating the solar fluid, is audible to the etheric ear as a constant hum, and the vortices of force are clearly felt. The keynote of this activity is set by the sonorous flame burning in the medulla oblongata, which in turn strikes the keynote of the archetype. When the ego desires action, it causes the brain to specialize large amounts of this energy, which is poured into the muscles, forcing action. Max Heindel describes the millions of mouths in the positive female vital body that absorb solar energy to a greater extent than in the negative male vital body. This, he says, explains the great recovery capacity of girls and women. The excess force is supplied to the female vital body for the needs of motherhood, but it is also there for use in everyday life. Students sometimes see these mouths as circles, and it appears that these circles are the basic unit of the positive pole of the vital ether, which determines the shape of the general magnetic matrix, a network or mesh of force. Within the magnetic mesh, there are countless vortices. Most physicists agree that a moving electric charge generates a magnetic field, but a few are investigating the possibility that magnetism and electricity may not actually be the same thing, proposing the existence of monopoles, which are to magnetism what electrons are to electricity. According to this theory, there are both positive and negative monopoles, just as there are positive and negative electrons. The occult student speaks from the point of view of etheric experience, and therefore speaks of both electricity and magnetism of the body in connection with the two lower ethers. However, it should be noted that electrical forces are more often referred to in connection with the chemical ether, and magnetic forces with the vital ether or force spiral, large and small, some spinning to the left and others to the right. This reminds us of the saying that light is energy running in circles, running freely, while matter is bottled energy. The chemical ether is the bottle for non-living matter, and the chemical ether, together with the life ether, is the bottle for living matter. The etheric atom and the physical atom are, by rule, strongly intertwined, but students of occultism and some others often have the sensation that the etheric atom unravels from the physical atom. Only recently has physical science realized that in nature, there is a difference in whether a force works to the right or to the left. In the past, the law of parity expressed the common belief that there was no difference in the direction of forces in nature. A whole new branch of science has developed from the discovery that this difference certainly marks a distinction in both the structure of matter and the development of life. From the nebulae and galaxies in the sky, to the spiral growth of leaves and plant shoots, and through the helix of chromosomes where genes are strung like beads, to lotions and the atomic bases of substances that are living or have lived, we discover again that the carbon atom seems to be a special agent of the spiral habit. Although there are non-living molecules and ions that also show the spiral habit, this characteristic is frequently the sign of life forces. We cite, "What initiated right and left-handedness, now so vital for living beings? If any vital process must accompany the separation of right-handed materials from left-handed ones, how could life have begun in the first place? If everything that is now right-handed suddenly became left-handed, would life continue without interruption and without change? These are well-studied problems. Some good guesses have been made, but they have not provided the full answer. The guesses have emerged, and perhaps the full answer will come from the examination of the symmetries of the forces acting on matter, together with the symmetries of the matter on which they act." Crystals are one of the most beautiful examples of order and symmetry. If we think a little more, we will see that order and symmetry have a very wide application in all the natural sciences. Today, Physicists think of the symmetries of the fundamental particles that make up the universe, in the fields of force in which those particles are found, and in the mathematical equations that describe the resulting behavior of the world. Chemists think of the symmetries of the simple and complicated molecules formed by those particles, and biologists think of those symmetries under that ordering in their efforts to understand the origin and behavior of life itself. 6. Organic versus inorganic magnetism. Although we can speak of magnetic rain as solar ether, it is not a property of sunlight. It can be seen falling through space both in dense darkness and in light. That is why occult science classifies it with the vital ether. It is the specific pathway for its specialization. Its fluid magnetism is the source of what is commonly known as sexual attraction, which occult science considers an activity of the positive and negative poles of the vital ether. However, polarity as such is not limited to the vital ether or to the sexuality of creatures that propagate organically. It is also found in the higher spiritual planes, where it manifests differently as evolution progresses. The incarnate entity, ego, is capable of specializing this cosmic magnetic fluid more and more, and thus humans specialize this energy in much greater quantities than plants and animals. Furthermore, research by Max Heindel suggested that the forces entering through the vessel show different colors, depending on the various uses made of the different vital waves. This colorless ether is, in fact, the original form of animal magnetism or organic magnetism, traditionally assigned to all living beings, but not to the mineral kingdom. Sex and inheritance are part of the function, but not the entire function, which is generally the promotion of life throughout the organism. Note that there exists mineral magnetism and animal magnetism. We can compare the difference between these two types of magnetism to the difference between inorganic iron and organic iron. The plant takes the mineral element, iron, and transmutes it into organic iron, which is abundant, for example, in the green leaves of the plant. However, this organic iron does not outwardly resemble a piece of iron or iron ore from which it originally derived. The magnetic field of the vital ether, as we have seen, builds the embryo in the womb, starting from the fertilized egg. As the child's body requires large amounts of this ether, the child's etheric aura is greater in proportion to its body than that of an adult. This reserve supply of ether in the child's aura consists of atoms of chemical ether, as well as a reserve supply of cosmic life force. The etheric atom consists of both life and chemical ether. Physical science has not yet discovered the colorless solar fluid, nor the fact that it is subject to human will. However, if it were not subject to human will, it could not be true that higher life forms specialize in greater and greater quantities of it. The cosmic magnetic rain indeed responds to human will, which is concentrated in the frontal center. As we know, a feeling of warmth often accompanies the descent of cosmic rain. Max Heindel points out that, in the early stages of our evolution, this cosmic force entered the vital body at the will of the human being, in a different way than it currently enters through the vessel. Now, we can begin to consciously recover the use of cosmic vital forces. Drawing in inorganic force through the human magnetic aura transforms it into organic magnetism, which the human body needs to grow. Hence the ancient practice of laying on hands. The magnetic healer effectively constructs an artificial womb of force in which the body of the patient is able to rebuild itself. There is a reported case of a child who was born with buds in place of the fingers of one hand, and after months of work by a group of ecclesiastical healers dedicated to an orthodox communion, these buds, which are found in the embryo, unfolded and grew until they became normal fingers, as if the child had been placed back in the mother's womb and the growth had resumed from where it had left off. Max Heindel has commented that when solar fluid is sent by the brain in particularly large quantities, it moves the muscles to which the nerves lead. But for the building work of the body, which is what healing truly is, even larger amounts of solar fluid are required, and unless they are called from space through the frontal center by human will and then directed by the brain, the miracles we've mentioned cannot be performed. Often, more than one healer must work on the case. The aforementioned group of healers did not know the modus operandi of cosmic forces, but they successfully invoked them through prayer to a divinity they imagined in the sky. It is noteworthy that most of the healers were women with their positive vital bodies. The science called mesmerism involves the use of these cosmic forces, But mesmerism is not the same as modern hypnosis, which depends on suggestion. Suggestion could not make embryonic buds turn into fingers for the child, nor could suggestion delay the corruption of a piece of flesh or a vegetable, as it has been reported the application of living magnetism can. We have said that magnetic force is almost always allied with some form of moisture, such as tree sap in plants and blood in animals and humans, or other fluids. Trees cut for Christmas bleed their sap, and as this bleeding continues, the vital magnetism of the tree precipitates, first, a true hemorrhage of force shortly after felling, then more slowly until the tree is dead and its needles turn brown. It is painful for any sensitive person to sit in a room with a tree that is bleeding so palpably, and most occult students prefer a living tree or at least a tree sacrificed by the Forest Service to make room for healthier growth on the slopes of mountains or a beautiful artificial tree, of which there are many fine examples. The solar force flowing through the vessel is a cosmic force, but still inorganic from the human point of view, which, through the alchemy of the incarnate spirit, becomes an organic magnetic life force. Iron is important for the creation of human magnetism, and there are 4 atoms of iron in each cell of normal hemoglobin, and the presence of iron on the planet is undoubtedly related to planetary magnetism. But there are also large magnetic fields in interstellar space, the matrices of future worlds. We have spoken of the forces of life, but occult science also speaks of the forces of death, and just as the force of life is associated with the sun, the forces of death are associated with the moon. Max Heindel speaks of deadly lunar forces and also of lunar crystallizing forces. The vital process is a balance between the ascending solar forces and the descending lunar forces. In some ancient schools of occult science, these currents are known as the ascending and descending breaths. The cycles of growth of the vital body are set in septenary periods derived from the lunar crystallizing forces. 7 years is the maturation period for the etheric envelope. The vital body is born from its envelope at the age of 7. Then the various ethers mature more separately in cycles of 7 years. The ether of life at 14 years with the desire body, the ether of light at 21 with the mind, and the reflecting ether at 28 with the full maturation of the mind. Maxwell also mentions an ancient tradition of lunar beings whose lifespan, from childhood to old age, is only 7 years. These cases are known to medical science. Up to now we've talked about the etheric sight and hearing. We must also consider the etheric sense of touch. The vital ether is perceived, for example, as a kind of heavy magnetic fluid. It can be called syrupy if we understand what we mean by this, as its magnetism gives it this consistency. When the invisible helper immerses their hands in the patient's etheric body and then withdraws them, the patient's vital body seems to cling to their hands. Normally, of course, the patient does not feel their own magnetism, but the magnetic aura of the helper in this case is exerting an external attraction. This is the assimilation cement that Max Heindel speaks of in The Vital Body, p.71. Note that the assimilation cement pertaining to the vital ether is found below the molecular threshold of the body, while the cement of the chemical ether is definitely molecular, as evidenced by the fact that the force lines of the vital body pull these molecules which many seers have described. We have said that the molecule is the smallest portion of a substance that can still be called matter. By breaking down the molecule, we enter the world of atoms, and by breaking down atoms, we enter the world of subatomic forces, and here at the boundary of matter, we enter states known by occult science as the vital ether. The invisible helper works directly within and on the molecular structure of the body in the chemical ether. Though they may materialize a hand physical enough to perform a massage, chiropractic adjustments, or even surgery, biochemists naturally assume that all the electromagnetic phenomena of the body derive from the body's chemistry. The occultist asserts that the vital body has an independent existence, one that exists before the body and is its continuous matrix. Undoubtedly, biochemists will someday take their instruments and analyze a corpse, and, of course, they will not find any electromagnetic field emanating from the body, which, being dead, has no field. But if the occultist is right, the biochemist, all reactions, including those of living matter, are linked to the core. By 1964 to 1965, biochemists will discover its electric field if they develop instruments sensitive enough to explore the space a few meters above the corpse. There, they will find that, for several days after death, a magnetic field floats above the corpse, and even later, If they knew where to look and how to position their instruments, they could discover a human-shaped magnetic field, corresponding to the corpse, but separate from it in both space and time. But if the theory of a floating magnetic field seems strange, we can remember that astronomers now postulate that there are magnetic fields in interstellar space that, if nothing else, accelerate cosmic rays on their way through the universe. 7. The vital ether and cosmic fire. The vital fire that burns in the vital ether is not just mere physical heat, but a fire that denotes the presence of a living spirit. In the so-called lost sayings of Jesus, discovered in Egypt in 1904. And again in 1945 the assertion appears, "Wherever there are two, they are not without God, and wherever there is one, I say that I am with him. Lift the stone, and there you will find me, and in the rock, and there I am." This is still used in some churches in an Easter ceremony, where part of the ritual consists of striking a spark from a rock and lighting the Easter candles with the flame that forms from the spark, suggesting that these verses speak of the cosmic fire, the spirit of life. However, the universal fire is cold while it sleeps in the rock and in cosmic space. It remains cold in the plant kingdom. Although in the etheric view it appears as a delicate flame, not a burning and jumping flame but a constant glow of pink-orange, which characterizes the vital ether in the plant kingdom, it takes on a pink or deeper red hue in animals and humans. Just like the radiation of energy and atomic particles, it is not visible to the human eye, although it exists. The heat of cold-blooded animals or plants is undetectable to human senses in the common range. On this subject, we quote Dr. Donald H. Andrew from Johns Hopkins University, who said in a speech, "If you turn off the lights and sit in the dark, it seems like you're not glowing. However, if you stand in front of an infrared television camera in complete darkness, the television screen will show a glowing shape radiating light as a result of the vibrations of its atoms." This is a physical fact established about 10 years ago by a professor at the University of Chicago, Dr. Bernard Strayer, and another from the National Laboratory of OR, Dr. William Arnold. They discovered that green plants emit a red glow very similar to fireflies, and then in the laboratory, they produced a substance that appears to be the same as that which in the plant emits the red glow. The red light cannot be seen with the naked eye, they pointed out, but something that produces it must be there, and they added that these findings were made possible by the study of fireflies and luminous bacteria. It is now thought that there is a close relationship between the emission of light that releases energy and the photosynthesis that stores energy. Even more surprising is the fact that the same chemical compounds responsible for the emission of light in fireflies and luminous bacteria, and that often provoke illuminated fish at night, are involved in photosynthesis. Only in warm-blooded animals and humans does the cold fire of space produce heat, which is perceived as such by the human sensory equipment. The heat aspect of the vital ether in the human body is truly a property conferred by the activity of forces operating in the positive pole of the light ether, which we will discuss in our next series of lessons. Just as we cannot completely separate the chemical ether from the vital ether, we also cannot completely separate the vital ether from the light ether. All ethers react and interact with each other, just as color is associated with sunlight in the common range of vision. Color is associated with the body's magnetism in etheric vision. The 5 colors specialized by the ethers, which range between violet and red in a color wheel, are not found in the solar spectrum as it is known to ordinary vision, nor in the rainbow, which is the refracted sunlight. These are the colors ranging from beyond violet, through medium purple to magenta or peach, the color of the flower, to lower red. But although these colors are not found in the solar spectrum, they are true primary colors in the world of desire, and the peach flower color is the color of the vital force as seen in the vital ether in the human body. Max Heindel says that this color is not always described identically by those who see it. Some call it pink, blue, or purple pink. It is the expression of the universal vital spirit, as already mentioned, and as it is vital ether, it only appears in plants, animals, and humans, not in the mineral kingdom. Normally, the color of the vital body is called pinkish tone. The chemical ether is characterized by being blue or indigo, deepening to medium purple or almost black. Other colors can also appear in these 2 lower ethers, but the mentioned colors are basic. When the solar ether pours through the vessel and is refracted into the seed atom of the vital body in the solar plexus, it pours through the body so that each atom of the body, both physical and etheric, receives its stimulation. The excess of force is then radiated outward in pink-colored lines. The first thought of Mr. Eel when studying the ethers was that this force acquired its pink tone by refraction through each prismatic atom of ether. Later, he decided that the change occurred in the seed atom of the solar plexus and in a group of atoms around it, cosmic conception P.10. He had not completed his research at the time of his sudden death in January 1919. Summary. Let's return to the vision of the vital body available for the etheric sight of the occult scientist. The vital body atom is seen in conjunction with the physical atom with which the etheric atom is closely intertwined. To imagine the physical and etheric atom of the body, imagine a pear-shaped wire basket with spiraled wire walls curving obliquely from pole to pole. This is the physical part of the atom. It has a shape almost identical to that of our Earth, and the prismatic vital body atom is inserted into the top, which is the widest part and corresponds to the positive pole of the Earth. As the vital prism is inserted at the top, the tip of the prism extends toward the bottom of the basket, which is called the negative pole. This entire atom suggests that the prism is part of the atomic nucleus, of which little was known in the life of Max Heindel, while the wire basket might represent the spiral trajectories of the electrons traveling in the magnetic vortices, determined by the vital ether. Notice that this atom is not disc-shaped but pear-shaped, as it is now thought that the Earth globe may actually have its broadest part at the South Pole. The etheric prisms expand when the vital force precipitates through them and contract, wrinkle during fatigue, and the lines of force wrinkle and bend, forcing the ego to withdraw in sleep. In page 138 of Rosicrucian Mysteries, Max Heindel comments that when the vital body collapses, so to speak, the small currents of force that permeate each atom seem to wither, and the ego is forced to leave its body to the restorative powers of sleep. He also mentions certain forces surrounding the atom and the Earth, from the pole to the equator, vital body P.42. For etheric vision, the points of the etheric prisms are seen extending in all directions, but just like physical vision, etheric vision varies from person to person. Although everyone sees practically the same, they do so with different degrees of sharpness and clarity. Therefore, students must. Max Heindel specifically designates this as the common physical atom, but modern occult writers point out that it may not be the hydrogen atom, but an etheric atom, which is actually subatomic, called the ultimate physical atom. Max Heindel says, if we are so developed that we are able to leave our dense physical body and embark on the soul's flight into interplanetary space, we will find that the ultimate physical atom is spherical, like our Earth a ball. Rosicrucian Mysteries P.8, 9. 19th century physics held that atoms had various shapes, hence this comment that the true atom is round. Modern physicists say that the atoms of matter are energy circulating in circles. Avoid arbitrary assertions until you are sure that your etheric vision is reasonably well developed. For one, the vital body may appear as nothing more than a vaguely colored mist extending about 1.5 inches from the body. For another, this mist resolves into a multitude of pink-colored force lines. The chemical ether may be seen close to the body, and for some its dark blue color may resemble an empty space, like the core of a gas flame. Many have seen crystals, molecules, and particles emerging from the surface of the body. Sparks of energy that leave the head, face, and hands are occasionally seen by almost everyone. They are also seen around plants, and a blue spark flying from a seed sometimes signals the presence of a nature spirit inhabiting the seed. It is generally discovered that when Max Heindel refers to the vital body, he specifically means the vital ether rather than the chemical ether, as of course vital means belonging to life, but it is the chemical ether that forms the real etheric double of each molecule of the human body. However, each atom is also penetrated and surrounded by a light aura of luminous and reflective ethers. Vital body P.43. The death of the body occurs when the archetype collapses, followed by the breaking of the seed atom in the heart and the collapse of the vital body, just like before sleep, which forces the ego to withdraw from its vehicles. It is then seen that the vital body rises like a column of twisting smoke and reforms in the likeness of the individual above the body, to which it remains connected by the lower part of the silver cord, and with which it synchronously decays. Folklore describes this phenomenon as the corpse vigil, and although it is usually seen as a more or less luminous blue-grey mist, it has occasionally been seen in green or bluish-green, changing color during the decomposition process. Death is often accompanied by the sensation of a spiral movement of the body's atoms, but this feeling is not necessarily an indication of death, and the student should not be alarmed if this occurs. The work under the initiatic grade safely unscrews the ether atoms, allowing the initiate to leave the body, leaving the two lower ethers with the physical body. Only a specific exercise imparted by true occult masters allows the individual to perform the correct excision in the ethers between the two lower and the two upper ethers. Incorrect exercises, especially those taught in mediumship classes, can cause a rupture between the chemical ethers and the vital ethers, or between the chemical ether atoms and the physical atoms, and when this occurs, various illnesses such as tuberculosis can arise, vital body P.71. However, in any case, the spiraling of atoms is a characteristic sensation. It should also be observed that when the chemical ethers and vital ethers are expelled from the dense body, a profound unconsciousness occurs that is not sleep. When consciousness returns as the vital atoms re-enter their physical counterparts, a sensation of tingling and prickling is felt. Physiologists say this is due to the restoration of blood circulation, as the same sensation occurs when circulation is cut off from a part of the body, such as when a hand falls asleep. When this occurs, the occultist sees the etheric hand hanging below the physical one. In the same way, in hypnosis, the etheric head is pushed downward around the subject's shoulders, splitting from above. Blood circulation also slows down in these conditions. The atoms of the physical body have a very slow vibration. The ether atom drives all physical atoms into action and vibration, including the blood atoms in the human body. The normal vibration rate of the physical atom is usually an octave below the vibration of the ether atom that surrounds it, vital body P.191. The sensation of tingling that occurs when the ether atom re-enters the physical atom it has been expelled from does not cease until the normal vibration of the body atom is reached, one octave below the etheric one. Then the discomforts cease as normal activity is re-established. Occult science has not yet clarified the relationship between planetary, solar, and etheric magnetism in the living beings of the Earth. The horoscopes of people born in the southern hemisphere are traditionally reversed, so where a northern chart shows the ascendant of Aries, for example, the southern chart would show Libra. Could this be an effect of planetary polarity? This is one of the many mysteries that occult science of the future must resolve. 8. Star and spiral. We have seen in a previous chapter what modern science has to say about the spiral. It is a curious fact that the five-pointed star, always of great importance in esotericism, is also recognized as a special feature of life on this planet, as we learn in the new biology. Let's explore a little more the role this symbol plays in the world around us. In a certain tarot card designed by A.E. Waite, this interesting design is found, a small flower growing that takes the form of a true five-pointed star. A flower of this kind really exists, shaped like a five-pointed star, with the same star shape repeated several times at the center of the flower and at its base. The star itself is of a delicate mauve color, not very different from the pinkish blue of the vital body as described by Max Heindel, and its petals are like soft velvet to the touch. It grows mainly in Australia, but is also found in parts of the Middle East and Asia, and has recently been discovered by gardeners in California, as it grows well in Southern California. It is called the pot flower. Now, among the 6 crystal systems known to science, there is no admissible form with a quinasymmetry axis, and therefore no crystal can have such an axis. Crystals and crystal growing, Holden and Singer P.163. It is interesting to reflect on the difference between crystals and living organisms. In this regard, starfish and buttercups, for example, have axes of quintuple symmetry, but crystals do not. Therefore, there is no star in the crystal domain, which includes most of our solid Earth's crust, but only in the kingdom of life. The 5-petaled wild rose, the predecessor of all modern roses, can also be mentioned alongside starfish and buttercups. There can hardly be any doubt that the ancient scientists observed this simple fact of nature. For everywhere, the five-pointed star is the symbol of the human being, as in Christianity, where it represents the child Jesus and points to the birth of Christ in each person. Closely associated with the esotericism of the five-pointed star is the spiral of life, observed throughout the universe. In occult symbolism, it is seen as the serpents intertwining the caduceus, Mercury's staff, and as such, it represents the ascent of the triple spiritual fire, the spinal fire discussed in Freemasonry, Catholicism, and ancient and modern initiation by Max Heindel. Esotericists will immediately understand the supreme importance of this combination of symbols, the star and the spiral, both intimately related to the most complicated vital processes. In Masonic symbolism, in the rites and mysteries of the Rosy Cross and the Holy Grail, the spiral is seen in the staircase that was found in the Temple of Solomon. Historians and archaeologists have not fully agreed on the type of building that the Temple of Solomon really was. Some compare it to the temples of ancient Ur in Chaldea, the birthplace of Abraham, where the temple of the god of the moon crowned the top of 3 large stages of masonry, similar to a mountain. Others have compared it to the ziggurats of Babylon, 7-tiered pyramids with a small shrine or sanctuary on the last floor, where it was said that the god appeared to the priestess or priest. We might consider this upper room of the Babylonian temple as the oracle where the will of heaven was made known. There were 2 ziggurats or stepped pyramids within the walls of ancient Babylon, the Temple of Bel in the central area and the Temple of Nebo, or Mercury, further east in the suburb of Borsippa. The 2 were connected by a sacred road or walled street. The Tower of Mercury in Borsippa was the oldest and holiest, and it can be believed that from its top, the astronomer priests watched the small star near the sun, which was the planet Mercury. The stepped pyramids of Chaldea and Babylon necessarily had staircases and inclinations that led from one stage to another up to the top floor. They undoubtedly also had secret interior spiral staircases as shortcuts to the top, known only to the priests and their initiates, as suggested by the Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt. However, archaeologists have never discovered such an interior passageway in the Babylonian and Assyrian pyramids or towers. Persia and Assyria shared Chaldean civilization and also had towers that were both observatories and temples. They also housed great libraries. Perhaps more clearly than anywhere else, China shows the true nature of the pyramids and towers built in ancient times. For example, the famous Temple of Heaven in Beijing, with its 3 marble terraces and 9 concentric circles, its staircases at the 4 cardinal points, and the numerous pagodas, some with up to 13 floors, each with a surrounding roof, and containing only a spiral staircase leading to the top. They were obviously designed for astronomical observatories, as well as for sky worship in a nation where, for 1,000 years before Christ, the official religion was purely astronomical. In recent times, archaeologists have discovered traces of a tower at the Essene headquarters at the Dead Sea in the ruins of Qumran, with a suggestion of a central pillar around which a staircase extended. Whether it was merely a warehouse, a watchtower, or an observatory, perhaps all of this and more is still under consideration. It is notable that Mercury and Mercury's day of the week were once sacred to them, and it is said that Wednesday was their day of rest. Returning to Christian Europe, we find that in some accounts, the legendary Temple of the Grail also had its high tower, within which was the spiral staircase leading to the upper level, where the Grail Chapel stood, and the mysteries of the Grail were celebrated. What was revealed in these mysteries at the top of the tower? Evidently the dome of the sky revolving around the North Star, guarded by the dragon, and just before dawn, during certain times of the year, the planet Mercury shining like a diamond not far from the rising sun. For this is precisely what the earliest legends say. The mystery of the Grail is revealed in the stars of the sky, especially in the zodiac and its decans. Other accounts state that the temple artisans envisioned the heavens within the dome, with stars and planets moving along their courses. Similarly, in the Temple of Healing on Mount Ecclesia, the vaulted ceiling suggests the vault of heaven, around which the 12 zodiac constellations align, with Leo, the lion of the mysteries, over the altar, and Aquarius, the son of man, who may come upon the entrance gate. In an era when illiteracy was common, it is easy to see how the neophyte would be taught to visualize the ladder as their physical body relaxed into sleep. Clearly, this is not the trance as it is commonly defined. The awakened mind finds its way up the spiral staircase to the place of the mystery at its top, always turning to the right, and the neophyte awakens in the inner planes, within the sanctuary of the initiation temple, or at its threshold, or in its antechambers, according to their merit. Because in the inner planes, space is not a consideration, the step at the top of the spiral staircase takes the neophyte at once, without intermediate journey, to their destination. Today, the philosophy of science recognizes this condition in what is termed the collapse of space, and its correlate, the collapse of time. It is as if all the space between one point and another vanishes, and the journey from here to there becomes instantaneous. Sometimes meditation offers a hint of this, for when the mind becomes spiritually lucid, the neophyte sees in a crystal space, perhaps viewing some distant point on Earth's surface. They have not left the body, nor have they gone anywhere, yet they perceive the reality of the distant place. And sometimes they are seen or even touched, or their mental voice is heard by the people there. They feel they can reach out and touch the objects of that distant place because they are both there and here at the same time. This collapse of space explains many strange dreams in which events and places seem to merge with one another without rhyme or reason. It also explains why the same mysterious temple has been discovered in many different places, deep in the dark forest, at the top of the mountain, in swamps and marshes, in palaces and courts, and in the very home of the seeker. When the neophyte experiences a sensation of movement in the inner space, it means that their attention is tracking the intermediate distance and, so to speak, building a path of thoughts or a bridge upon which they seem to travel. However, this is unnecessary. The journey can be immediate and without any sense of transition. Thus, for the student of the mystery school, the star and the spiral, in addition to their external scientific and exoteric meaning, reveal something different and unique. The spiral ascent of the mind in the tower of consciousness, and at its peak, the bright and shining star, which is the invisible helper itself, shining for the world with the dawn. The helper returns to its body, and as it hovers over it, feeling the magnetic pull of the vital body dragging it towards the physical form, it becomes aware of the rotation of many wheels of force in its aura. As these wheels turn, it settles smoothly, and without discomfort, into the dense physical instrument that is already lying on the bed. There, it awakens to resume the cross of the body in the world of time and space. Part 3. Under the Ether of Light. In our chapter on the vital ether, we learned something about what Max Heindel designated as the colorless and fluid solar ether. We observed that this solar fluid was visible to the etheric sight under various states or conditions, such as a kind of cosmic force rain that precipitates through the etheric vessel and turns pink in the solar plexus. We also observed that this solar fluid was magnetic and felt as such by the etheric senses, and although it is called solar ether, it is studied in connection with the vital ether and not the light ether, because the vital ether is the particular channel through which it specializes as magnetism. It belongs to the dark spectrum that exists both below and above the normal range of visible light for the human eye. In cold-blooded creatures and the plant kingdom, solar ether appears colorless and cold when seen by the etheric senses. We can draw a parallel with this condition if we take an ordinary iron magnet in our hands. This magnet will have a north pole and a south pole, or a positive and negative charge, and it will attract iron filings. However, we normally cannot see light or feel any sensation emanating from the magnet. The iron is cold and dark despite its easily demonstrable magnetic field. Only when the light ether acts in conjunction with the vital ether do we see the appearance of biological magnetism and the vital fire in warm-blooded creatures. The colors associated with the activities of the vital ether are those of ultraviolet to infrared and other rays not yet known to the general public. However, the perception of these forces and colors is another matter. When the occult student begins their study of the light ether, they enter the range of light, heat, and color of normal senses. The so-called five senses are the gift of the forces that work through the negative pole of this ether. However, we can also say that the light ether is the strength of the brain and mind because it is the seat of all sensory perception, both within and below, and above the normal range of the sensory organs. Extrasensory perception belongs to this ether in its upper part, where it affects and interacts with the reflective ether. The forces that work along the negative pole of the light ether are the ones that vitalize and, in the beginning, create the sensory organs, especially the eye, giving them the power to respond and recognize the differences in vibration rates and classify these vibrations according to the effects they produce in the ego's consciousness. The nervous system is their special field of activity. We know, of course, that nerves are actually part of the sensory mechanism of the brain, which is made of the same grey matter as the nerves. New biology knows that electrical impulses travel through the brain and nerves, the vibrations ranging from 16 to 32,000 per second, which the ego recognizes as sound. These are vibrations in the air, but there is also a supersonic vibration, a supersound, which is audible to the etheric senses, another range of vibrations that the ego recognizes as sensations of heat and cold, softness and hardness, etc. Another as sight, another as smell, another as taste, and so on. All of this is merely a series of variable vibrations recognized by the ego, whose speed produces the different sensations assigned to the 5 senses, or types of receptors. There are also internal reception organs, receptors that inform the ego about things like weight, the sense of weight, heat, the sense of heat, balance or equilibrium, the sense of balance, the relationship of body parts to each other, the proprioceptive sense, essentially a muscular sense. Meanwhile, a proximity sense, like that developed by blind people, gives the feeling of something near that cannot be seen or felt, a nearing object or an invisible presence, at which point the proximity sense fits into the extrasensory range of perception. All of these sensory perceptions are properties of the negative pole of the light ether, as it is known in occult science. It is of particular interest to the esotericist to observe that the sense of heat has been finally located by modern science in a special set of nerves centered in the spinal cord, which send long nerve filaments to areas of the skin, mainly around the middle of the body. The buttocks and back are most sensitive to temperature. In September 1963, a compendium of readers' mysteries about our sensory organs revealed that the body's heat control center has generally been assigned to the brain region of the cerebellum, or the medulla oblongata, where occultists say the flame of life burns. It is this negative pole of the light ether that acts with the vital ether in the production of living creatures with a full range of sensory perception or physical and etheric consciousness. The thalamus, a tiny organ located approximately in the center of the head and in front of the pineal gland, is believed to be the original or primitive brain, where primordial instincts reside, while the larger mass of the brain is the seat of sensory consciousness or knowledge. The pituitary body is located lower and further forward than the thalamus and may be the seat of the subconscious and conscious minds, as modern analytical psychology defines them. The so-called subconscious mind of modern psychology actually includes what occult scientists call the superconscious mind and the forces that operate in the reflective ether. Why is the range of light ether defined in terms of the solar spectrum? Because all human senses have evolved in a system dominated by our sun, most of whose rays are found in this particular range from infrared to ultraviolet. Science had little to say to occultists until recently about the activities of the negative and positive poles of the light ether. What the occultists saw with expanded vision could not be explained in terms of academic physics. The situation has now changed. A correlation is now possible, and an explanation can be made, for which quantum theory is responsible. According to this theory, the basic unit of radiation is the quantum, a packet of energy called a photon, which is continuously created in free space by the collision of positrons and electrons and also released from the inside of atoms when electronic changes occur. No law has yet been discovered to demonstrate how or when these sparks of energy are created or can be created. There is a principle of uncertainty in physics. Radiation is composed of individual units known as quanta. When there is a sufficient number of them, these quanta organize into wave patterns, each with a wavelength. Thus, light is both particles in the sense of quanta or energy packets, as well as waves. Both are visible as such to the etheric sight. We will understand it better if we think of a few drops of water that do not form a wave, but when there are millions of drops, a wave becomes possible under the right conditions. However, we also observe that each photon unit is both a particle and a wave. It is noteworthy, says Oyl, that the shorter the wavelength, the more energetic the individual quanta, photons. This is why gamma rays, X-rays, and even ultraviolet light are so destructive to animal tissues while radio waves are harmless. Another interesting point is that, of the vast range of wavelengths from radio waves to gamma rays, only the narrow band ranging from 400 to 800 millimicrons can be detected by human senses, and this is not an accident. This is precisely the range in which most of the sun's radiation is emitted. It is true that the sun emits some ultraviolet rays and even some X-rays, but the Earth's atmosphere absorbs much of this destructive radiation, preventing it from reaching the ground. As a result, there has never been an opportunity for creatures on Earth to develop receptors for these wavelengths. However, occultists can and do develop receptors for these and other wavelengths through forces that operate at the negative pole of the light ether. While it is the scientific aspect of light itself that is more easily observed by the budding occult scientist, all sensory perception belongs to the negative or passive aspect of the light ether. Today, he continues, more infrared rays reach the ground than others due to the water droplets in the air, which absorb more visible light than infrared. However, infrared rays do not affect the human eye. It is clear that it would be a great advantage to have eyes sensitive to infrared, as I suspect birds may have. This would largely explain the amazing vision that birds seem to possess. Astronomers claim that our sun is a yellow or orange star of the class known as red or yellow dwarfs, among the most unstable. Therefore, sunlight is not truly white, but rather tinged yellow or golden, and the light ether is also described by scientists as golden or yellow. However, like sunlight, it possesses a full band of colors visible to ordinary sight as color or as light, but visible to etheric sight as vibration and points of energy. The occultist view of the light. Ether. Although all four ethers have work to do in every part of the living organism, each ether has its own special job. The chemical ether is the channel for forces related to the construction and nutrition of the entire body, but its special field of action is the skeletal structure or bones. The vital ether promotes growth activities and the perpetuation of the species, with its special area being the blood and other bodily fluids, the reproductive system, and the endocrine glands. The light ether is the channel for cosmic forces related to sunlight, color, and heat, all of which are tremendously important in our evolution. Its special area is the nervous system, both voluntary and sympathetic, the pineal gland, and the brain as a whole, which is the seat of the human spirit, the ego. The brain is the great receptor and coordinator center of the nervous system, organizing all sensations transmitted by the sensory organs through the nerves. In our last chapter, we noted that the tiny thalamus body is believed to be the original brain, where instincts and psychic powers still have a focus, while the upper brain governs the later evolution of sensory powers. Again, we have seen that the vital ether specializes in the solar fluid that acts like electricity for the nervous system. Mr. Heindel further adds that the light ether transmits the driving force through the various nerves, enabling the ego to move the body. The driving force is not the same as the vital energy involved in growth and the perpetuation of the species, although it may arise from the same primordial root. It should be observed that the solar fluid also circulates in plants that already have a rudimentary nervous system, and therefore the beginning of sensory perception. Modern physics offers some clarifications on these points, affirming that the photon, the unit of the electromagnetic spectrum, is itself chargeless. However, it carries electromagnetic energy. The photons discussed in these lessons on the light ether belong only to that band of the electromagnetic spectrum known as the light of our sun. The electromagnetic spectrum extends both above and below this band. The cosmic fire operating in the light ether is mentioned, and the human ego is part of this fire, with its energies playing through the light ether, not as part of the race complex, but as an individual, willing and thinking spirit working in its destiny. Max Heindel says that the ego works particularly in the heat of the blood, as stated in Cosmoconception P.36. The forces that play along its positive pole, that is, the light ether, are the forces that generate the heat of the blood in the higher animal species and in man, making them individual sources of heat. These forces also circulate the blood. At the age of 21, when the mind is born, detaching from its protective envelope, the ego fully takes control of its own bodies, and the blood heat, which during adolescence was often overheated, is now maintained somewhere near the standard of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. This blood heat is necessary for the ego's consciousness in the body. If the temperature of the blood falls too far below or rises too far above this, the ego is forced to withdraw from the body, which then falls into the states we recognize as sleep, coma, or death. The egoic fire is the alchemist's fire that ultimately creates the adept's diamond body. In cold-blooded animals, it is only the circulation of the blood that is activated through the positive pole of the light ether. There is no need for heat in plants. The forces operating at the positive pole of the light ether circulate the sap, and these forces are more related to the heat of the sun than to sunlight itself. Modern research has shown that even in the northern hemisphere, where ice and snow cover the earth, the slight change in etheric forces when the sun begins to move north from its most southern declination makes the trees awaken, and the sap begins to move in their roots and deep in their trunks. It is the latent cosmic heat in the positive pole of the light ether that triggers this awakening. The forces that act along the negative pole of the light ether are those that operate through the senses, manifesting as the passive functions of sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. They also construct and nourish the eye. Cosmo, page 36. For the etheric senses, the various colors are truly tangible as well as visible, and some occult researchers claim that all other sensations have a correlation with light and color. The different wavelengths of color in the sunlight can be felt, and a difference in quality is noted. Children, and sometimes adults, can differentiate between colors even if they cannot see them as such. Some physicists speak of a facial vision developed by these children, but about 40 years ago, Dr. Jules Romain demonstrated and discussed in his now out-of-print book, Allied, that most portions of the skin could be converted for use as sight. He discovered that areas especially sensitive to light were the forehead, cheeks, temples, chest, and hands. Embryologists also claim that almost any part of the embryo's skin can be used to form the eyes. Dr. Romain explains this by saying that the skin is full of tiny cells called ossæ, which in fact resemble miniature eyes. The occultist has always maintained that as long as the light ether is present, any living organism will develop sensory perception, especially the perception of light in some type of ocular structure. The force that works along the negative pole of the light ether is the one that deposits chlorophyll and colors in flowers. All the color in all realms of nature is deposited through forces working along the negative pole of the light ether. Since we now know that light is not just waves in an ether, but also consists of real particles in energy packets called photons, we can see that there is a defined and real substance that nature's forces can use and handle in this task of depositing color. These forces of nature include fairies, angelic beings, and the human ego. Because the light ether is the channel for forces that promote sensory perception, especially the eye, it is often true that the student's early experience with etheric vision is related to the phenomena of this ether. Generally, the first thing one sees is a kind of bluish fog or spiderweb that seems to fill the space, often in a twilight setting, or in a dimly lit room or hallway, or when coming from a darker room into a lit one, for example. Along a hallway, this bluish fog is seen moving violently where the light strikes it, pulsing with a quick movement, like the wings of a hummingbird. Later, one may see that the beating wings or spider webs of light are filled with rainbow colors, amidst which countless points of silver light rush. The more intense the light, the more particles are seen, and the larger they appear. They move through the atmosphere with great energy, appearing and disappearing continuously, but they do not settle on the ground. However, not all of them are basic sunlight. Some have another origin. Upon closer observation, the spiderweb in the space seems to consist of tiny transparent flakes with a nucleus similar to that of a comet, which is the flash that was first observed. The flake, as a whole, is transparent and membranous. Physicists speak of light as if it consists of both waves and particles, that is, the photon itself is both, and the occultist sees this photon in the range belonging to the radiation of our sun, as described here. The transparent flake seems to represent the wave aspect of the photon, and the spark, the particle aspect. The occultists suggest that the first is negative and the second is positive. However, this is tentative. In the human body complex, It is said that the light ether is predominantly positive in men and negative in women. Let's see how this works. The senses and colors belong to the negative pole, and women's sensory responses are generally faster than men's. They see colors more clearly and suffer less from color blindness. Their etheric aura also shows a higher proportion of the golden light ether, the positive energy of the light ether. However, it is evident in the dynamic impulse to action that characterizes male incarnation, and the male aura often shines densely with points of energy belonging to this ether. Men also show more of the fiery, selfish impulse, like light, which is formed by photons, and since photons are formed by both waves and particles, both appear together throughout space. When trying to study the light ether, the student should not look at an object or against a wall or ceiling, but directly at the space itself. The following quote is of interest. "The luminous ether is a substance of a peculiar type that does not have the familiar mosaic atom we usually call matter. We can call the ether a substance, but we can also call it space. Considering that space can possess certain morphological or structural characteristics that make it much more complicated than in the conceptions of Euclidean geometry. In fact, in modern physics, the expression luminous ether, stripped of its supposed mechanical properties and physical space, is considered synonymous with space. This may help the student observe this ether for the first time. He should lie in bed and look toward the corner of the ceiling in a brightly lit room. His eyes will not settle." Discussion of the reflective ether. Let's review the most notable features of the three lower ethers, as they are known in both physical and occult sciences. First, light belongs to what is called the electromagnetic spectrum, of which only a small segment or band is visible to the human eye, because this band represents the radiation from our sun, in whose field our senses evolved. If our race had evolved on a planet belonging to a red giant sun, for example, we might have developed vision in the infrared range. Interestingly, when etheric vision begins to unfold, it is usually the invisible aspect of light in our own solar spectrum that is seen first, the very light waves and the energy nuclei that flash in the waves. The waves of the luminous ether are actually formed by units or energy packets that are both waves and particles at once, both visible simultaneously to etheric vision. The energy unit is called a photon and is not only the unit of solar light, but the unit of all electromagnetic waves. "Photons are energy packets," says the physicist, "that correspond to atoms and molecules, which are packets of matter. Electrons, protons, and alpha particles are particles of electricity. All radiant energy is made up of photons. The photon is correctly defined as the building block of the electromagnetic field. It travels at the speed of light. The photon is never at rest. The electron, proton, and neutron can be at rest, but the photon is not. Hence, the electron, proton, and neutron are the units of matter, called, in occult terms, packets of the chemical and vital ethers, which Max Heindel describes as stationary ethers. However, radiant energy, whose unit is the photon, represents the energy that continuously escapes from matter, and occultly, it is the unit of the light ether. The photon itself has no charge, but it carries electromagnetic energy. Subatomic particles and photons have spin, and when they are charged, they respond to magnetic fields. Astronomers say that there are magnetic fields in interstellar space where new galaxies tend to form. However, the occult scientist also sees a cosmic force shower of electrical or magnetic nature, which he calls the colorless solar ether. It is not identical in nature to cosmic forces or solar and planetary magnetism, but there is some connection that has not yet been determined by either mundane science or occult science. The colorless solar ether is subject to the call of the human mind and will, just as it is known that the magnetic fields of space impart spiral activity to certain subatomic particles, generally nuclei. Additionally, the animal magnetism of occult science seems to be accompanied by spiral activity in the vital ether, which forms and guides the activities of the chemical ether. The two lower ethers are generally considered a unit of work, as it is almost impossible to study them separately. The amount of energy is proportional to frequency. X-rays have frequencies 1 times greater than incomplete. Science speaks of bioelectrochemistry and bioelectromagnetism in visible light. Therefore, when they give their energy to atoms, electrons, etc., their imprint is stronger and easier to observe, explains the physicist. The structure of the body is formed in the two lower ethers, and the vital ether specializes in solar fluid, which acts like electricity in the living organism. Solar fluid is converted from inorganic cosmic magnetism to the living magnetism known by occult science and now studied by physical science. The electric energy of solar fluid energizes the nervous systems of the human organism, both voluntary and sympathetic. Biologists have discovered the two complementary halves that make up every functioning electrical circuit. We mention in passing that the back of the head has a positive charge and the front has a negative charge. This front part is called the silent zone, and it is supposed to be associated with extrasensory perception. In occult science, the key note of the vital body is heard buzzing in the medulla oblongata, and its vibration is often felt in the back of the head. Scientific researchers claim that there are 3 axes of magnetic force to which humans are subjected, and they are testing various patients in hospitals to see if cosmic ray emissions, magnetic storms on the sun, and other phenomena of this type affect the nervous condition of human beings. Occult science has taught for centuries that such cosmic conditions, the macrocosm, have a reaction in the human organism, the microcosm. Modern science now uses the terms macrocosm and microcosm as freely as occult science did in earlier times, but the microcosm of modern physics tends to be the interior of atoms and molecules, and not just the human organism as a whole, with the infinitely large being the macrocosm and the infinitely small the microcosm. A greater understanding of the light ether will lead to a new and important science in healing through color and the use of color to promote plant and animal growth. Color therapy is already making great strides, not only among occultists but also in the fields of physics, chemistry and medicine. It is now understood that when the nature of light is seen as composed of both particles and waves, color can have a very clear and defined physical effect. Even very serious organic diseases have yielded to color therapy in the hands of experts, not only mental and nervous disorders, but also actual physical ones. Color therapists believe that a color ray represents a real substance, and that vitamins and other elements contain these substances. Therefore, in a very real sense, the red ray, for example, can be said to provide the necessary iron to the blood, and so on. However, none of these color deposits could be made in plants without the synthesizing or pattern-creating activity of the vital ether. As we have indicated at the limit of the life and light ethers, the strange vital substances called enzymes do their work. It has been discovered that in plants as diverse as apple trees and lettuce, there is an enzyme sensitive to light that regulates the plant's growth in all stages, from germination to fruit ripening. Government research stations, such as the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Center in Beltsville, Maryland, have partially isolated the substance, which is effective in minimal quantities, and reproduced what appears to be its critical reaction in a test tube. The enzyme exists in 2 forms and reversibly transforms from one to another when exposed to appropriate light wavelengths. One form absorbs light in the orange to red range, while the other absorbs light in the far red range, near the limit of the visible spectrum. The first form triggers effects such as reddening apples and germinating lettuce seeds, while the other form promotes flowering and regulates growth. The predominant form of the enzyme in the plant depends on the color of light to which the plant is exposed. Both forms are present in approximately equal amounts after exposure to light in the middle red range at longer wavelengths. The reaction favors the orange-red absorption form, while shorter wavelengths toward yellow stimulate the production of the far red absorption form. In the living plant, both the intensity and wavelength of light influence the enzyme's function. Researchers have found that soybean plants flower after an extremely brief exposure to far red light at night, but they do not flower if the light intensity is increased by 100 times. Low-intensity exposure to the same wavelengths stimulates germination in lettuce seeds, while high-intensity exposure reduces germination to almost zero. Occult science divides the light spectrum into positive, negative, and neutral zones. Colors below green are called warm or positive, and colors above green are called cool and electric or negative. Green is neutral, but no color is more important since it is the color of chlorophyll. In color therapy, positive or warm colors are considered ascending, as if coming from the earth, while negative or cool colors are considered descending from the sky. Green, the neutral color, attracts its forces horizontally. It has been demonstrated that green is a primary color. In the new science of color, regardless of what may be said about the psychological effects of color on humans, the same cannot be said about the influences of colored light on vegetation. Certain types of light promote root growth, others stimulate stems, leaves, and flowers, and others promote seed germination, etc. Meanwhile, the light-sensitive enzyme in the plant tissue proves to be an important link in the vital process. Science has reached the far red limit of the spectrum, but has not yet discovered the peach-colored flower known to occultists. The wavelengths of color will one day be used to open spiritual faculties, since, as we have demonstrated, these also belong to the forces of the light ether, with supersensory perception, just like common sensory perception, depending on this ether. Regarding consciousness in the body, Part 4, under the reflecting ether, 12, between two skies. Since written records exist, we find references to reflection and images as illustrations of how God's creative ideas objectify in space and time. Now, when we look in a clear water pond, under the first mirror of man, we see that the sky above us is the lowest part of the reflected scene in the water, while other objects, including ourselves, occupy intermediate positions between the two skies. In our study of the reflecting ether, let us keep this image in mind, as the neophytes of the mystery schools have done for thousands of years. In the Cosmo Conception by Rosicrucian Max Heindel, pages 37 and 38, it is written, "The reflecting ether deserves its name for more than one reason, as the images it contains are but reflections of the memory of nature. The true memory of nature lies in a much higher realm. In this reflecting ether, no well-trained clairvoyant cares to read, as the images are blurry and vague compared to those found in higher realms. Those who read in the reflecting ether are generally those who have no choice, who in fact do not know what they are reading. As a general rule, picometers and ordinary mediums obtain their knowledge through the reflecting ether. To some extent, the student of the occult school in the early stages of his training also reads in the reflecting ether, but is warned by his teacher about the inadequacies of this ether as a means of acquiring accurate information so that he does not easily draw erroneous conclusions. This ether is the medium through which thought makes an impression on the human brain and is closely related to the fourth subdivision of the world of thought. This is the highest of the four subdivisions contained in the realm of concrete thought, and it is the world home of the human mind. There is a much clearer version of the memory of nature found in the reflecting ether. It also states that the memory aspect of this ether resides in the negative pole, while the processes of thought make their impression on the brain through the positive pole. However, it does not say that these poles are magnetic poles. The reflecting ether is neither electric nor magnetic. Its positive pole is dominant at the front of the brain, in the zone where the silent watcher, the divine spirit, resides. We are also taught that the reflecting ether is the least dense of the four ethers, that it matures around the age of 28, that it is negative in men and positive in women, that it is volatile and migratory, and that it is indeed a hyperether, both astral and etheric and even mental, as it is so closely penetrated by desire and the things of the mind. While it appears empty at first glance, it hides many secrets within its translucent folds, consisting of images not only of physical forms, but also of feelings and thoughts. Consequently, when the student clairvoyant learns to read in this ether, he may be surprised to discover that not only does he see moving images of past events in his life, but he may sometimes also see the auric formations and thought forms that accompanied them, even though he had no clairvoyance at the time the events occurred. Another oddity of the reflecting ether, which makes evaluating what is seen there difficult, is familiar to most students, as Max Heindel has often mentioned. This is the way the temporal flow of the reflecting ether seems to reverse itself, so that if one wishes to investigate an event from, say, the year 500, one must first look at the year 600 and then let the record move backward to the year 500. However, it should not be assumed that this reverse flow is comparable to rewinding a moving film strip, in which, for example, a hen reverts to a chick and then enters its eggshell, which closes around it. It is more like time pulses that go backward to a certain point and then move forward according to an as yet undefined law that governs time images. It is common knowledge among occult students that the images of previous incarnations seem to unfold in a perfectly regular and normal way, at least in terms of any interval. The practice of retrospection is recommended for the development of time vision, with the power to regulate the flow of images. Additionally, the reflecting ether sometimes reverses numbers, so that a number that appears as 235 may actually be 532. However, no analogy can be carried too far, and it would not be correct to say that the numbers reflected in the reflecting ether are reversed in the same way that mirror numbers or writing are. Books and documents in the reflecting ether library are often read directly, as in the physical world, but in many cases, the reader suddenly finds himself immersed in the story or record he is viewing as an omnipresent observer. Though invisible, it must be noted that supersensory powers of clairvoyance cannot reveal anything to the clairvoyant unless he consciously and definitively directs his attention in a specific direction. The saints of the Church have achieved clairvoyance in many cases, but they saw nothing in the astral world except the mental forms of heaven and hell constructed by their own faith community. Students of occultism have developed the power to see disembodied spirits, the forces of nature and celestial hierarchies without ever discovering the nuclear forces known to modern physics because they never thought to look for them. The images in the reflecting ether generally fade away within a few thousand years, leaving holes where the clairvoyant cannot find anything in the charged areas of the mystery temples. However, the elder brothers and their initiates read a clearer version of nature's memory than in the fourth or archetypal region of the world of thought. This carries all the records belonging to our current earthly period. And as these records are reviewed and brought to life in the mind of each initiate, the corresponding record in the reflecting ether is, so to speak, reinforced and continues to be available even for the relatively weak vision of an ordinary clairvoyant or the beginning student in the occult school. Furthermore, the masters of the inner plane sometimes project images into the reflecting ether that they want the neophyte to see and remember. Thus, the neophyte sees records that would otherwise be unavailable to him. Max Heindel has demonstrated that light and the reflecting ethers are intimately associated not only in the golden wedding garment, but also in particular functions of the physical body. The student may find this functional closeness between these two ethers a source of confusion when first observing them. Once the clairvoyant student begins to see the agitation of the light ether, with its winged movements and energy comets in its film packets, he begins to recognize that space is pulsating like ocean waves in large, slow surges. Looking into these bluish spatial waves, he begins to see what at first may appear to be transparent, colorless forms, sometimes geometric but often leaf-like shapes moving in the ether sea like underwater plants. Then, as his focus continues to concentrate on these deep tides of light, the student may suddenly realize that he is indeed contemplating the reflecting ether, as behind the waves of light in slow motion, there rests what seems to be a mirrored world, a world with images as bright and clear as those in a mirror. There is no movement in it, no waves. The records in the reflecting ether are not easy to read at first, because the ether seems so full of them, all of which can be seen through it, requiring practice to separate them before each can be read. This is achieved through the power of the will to keep attention focused on one image without allowing side images to distract attention. There is a tendency in all undeveloped clairvoyants to simply relax and allow these images to flow or pass through their mental vision without trying to control or analyze them. Indeed, the ordinary person never realizes that it is possible to control the flow of images, and may even assume that he cannot stop the images that rush by his eyes. This is the secret of negative development, which can lead to obsession, or if not actual obsession, at least mediumship, and perhaps to a lack of mental and emotional control, which medical science would define as being unbalanced or disturbed. Therefore, the student must discriminate the flow of images he sees. It may seem to him that the images are irresistibly self-driven, but they are not. They respond to his will, as he soon discovers when he strives to control them. It should be noted that not all of these images are records. They sometimes include real scenes and real people living on Earth, and they may also include faces and forms of those who have passed away, as well as scenes from the inner worlds. This ether can be compared to a two-way mirror, as Max Heindel says, reflecting the outer universe on one side and the inner spiritual worlds on the other. What the reflecting ether reflects is often said to be colored by the observer's mental bias. His observations of the world, both outside and within himself, are inevitably influenced by who he is. Of course, this is undeniable. We see and experience the world through what we are. It cannot be otherwise. But the philosopher of modern science goes further, stating that it is not just that impressions of the outer world depend on one's mental predisposition, as well as the individual's sensorium settled in the brain, but that the outer or objective world itself is real and literally changed by the act of observation and experimentation through the interaction of physical forces, and the pressure of forces mentally generated, as in telekinesis. How can this be? The answer lies in the reflecting ether, with its strange, mirror-like qualities. It is the archetypal force of the ego reflecting or projecting into the great root substance of nature, the subconscious mind of the cosmos, which thus affects its world. The reflecting ether, as Max Heindel has shown, extends throughout the first sky and even into the second sky. It contains the principle of memory and has a special connection with the region of archetypal forces. We can call it the ground of the two lower heavens. When the scientist-philosopher observes that it may no longer be necessary to separate subject from object, observer from the observed, he is expressing the spiritual reality of the archetypal force as known in occult science. Space and time collapse in the realm of the reflecting ether, but the virgin consciousness of the spirit as ego remains. For the physical scientist, the external attributes of the reflecting ether are of primary interest. He thinks of worlds and universes of matter explained by inherited or reflected laws in this subtle plane. But for the occultist, it is the inner universe reflected in the reflecting ether that has primary importance. And it is here that the sense of barrier, the sense of separation between humanity and the living universe with its countless hierarchies, from elemental forces to the supreme being in which all creation lives and moves and has its being, collapses. Thus, Max Heindel's statement that this hyper-ether is a mirror reflecting a double reflection, the higher or inner universe and also the lower or outer universe, receives a new application in modern science. Furthermore, we recall that the Lord called the ethers of light and the reflecting ethers migratory and volatile. The reflecting ether, like the light ether, is luminous and flows. For this reason, at a given moment, the clairvoyant has difficulty distinguishing where one ends and the other begins. It has been pointed out that once the student has learned to see the waves of the light ether and practices observing these waves in clarity and darkness, when the air seems full of pulsating tides of bluish light or mist, his sight rests on leaf-like forms floating and drifting in the watery ether like underwater plants. Here, he may see the familiar frost pattern of a winter window pane, its branches undulating in the constant pulsing flow. After some time, he may become aware of the presence of color and life moving between the shapes. It may be that he sees a small tree with the appearance of crystal, moving gently in waves of light, and small transparent salt-like forms grouped together like crystal butterflies on its twigs. He discovers that when he focuses his attention on it, it suddenly seems to approach him, appearing to grow larger, and its colors and structural details can be studied as if it were an enlargement. But if the focus is diverted, everything disappears. Although it is called volatile and migratory, the reflecting ether presents images as vivid and clear as those seen in a mirror. So the student may feel as if they have truly passed through the mirror when having their first experience with this ether. Looking toward the spatial waves moving in the clarity and darkness, they may feel as though they are at the bottom of an ocean of soft bluish light, with the great surges pulsating around them, continually revealing new forms, all moving slowly like objects carried by the tides of the sea. Sometimes, they may feel convinced that they are truly seeing with their physical sight in this bluish light, and may fix their eyes on something in the room, say, a painting that they know is hung in a specific place. For a moment, it may indeed seem that they are really seeing the painting, but then they realize that instead, they are seeing the same omnipresent, translucent, crystal-like plant forms in the ether. The space is filled with geometric patterns. At this point, while contemplating the negative pole of the light ether, the clairvoyant student gradually shifts into seeing the negative pole of the reflecting ether. It is practically impossible to say when or where the boundary is crossed. Notice that these patterns swimming in the light ether show all the signs of being the guiding patterns of the elemental forces that construct earthly forms, the geometric patterns, and also the intricate plant-like patterns of all kinds, along with the life forms that work through them and with them. As seen here, these belong not only to the records of the past, but directly to the current world. It is at the boundary between these two ethers that archetypal forces mysteriously cross into the continuous space-time continuum. This is the point where so-called subjectivity becomes objective, and thought form meets the chemical reaction. The record inscribed in the seed atom of the heart and at the negative pole of the reflecting ether is only a manifestation of the powers residing in the reflecting ether. It is the specialized record belonging to an individual. The reflecting ether of the planet is the memory of the entire globe, receiving the reflections of the planet's own mental envelope, where the records of the spirit of the living earth remain inviolate and immutable. Some images in the reflecting ether belong entirely to what we call the past, whether in the subconscious of our current incarnation or in the subconscious race memory recorded in the seed atom at the apex of the heart that we carry with us from life to life. All of the past resides in that part of the reflecting ether that we call the subconscious, both in man and in nature, and can be probed with the proper technique. In this regard, Max Heindel mentions that George Tamori has written a story titled Peter Eaton, in which he clearly illustrates this theory of subconscious memory. Peter, imprisoned in an English penitentiary, learned to truly dream, that is, by putting his body in a certain position. He learned to lock the ether currents within himself so that at night he could stay in contact at will with any scene of his past life that he desired. There, he could see himself as a spectator, as the adult man he had become, and could view himself among his parents and playmates in the environment he had been in. In that moment when the scene was represented, he could see the entire scene with far more details than he had been able to observe at the time the events occurred in this material world. He would have been incapable of obtaining any information about the future, but the past had been inscribed on the tablet of his heart, and therefore it was accessible under the right conditions. Volume 1, Quander, p. 114. Note that the clairvoyant does not need to go into the etheric region to read the records in the reflecting ether. They do not leave their body, nor go anywhere. They simply read the reflecting ether that permeates the air they breathe, which has a special connection with the bloodstream and the seed atom in the heart. Max Heindel has stated, however, that in his opinion, it is necessary to be able to leave the body consciously in order to read in the memory of nature in the fourth region of the world of thought, for this record exists high in the mental atmosphere of the planet. Although the reflecting ether is largely limited to the past and the immediate present, it is also true that future events cast their shadows before, but when these shadows are cast into the reflecting ether, they are at the very threshold of materialization. Clairvoyants often see these reflected shadows of the future in the reflecting ether, both their own and those of others, but they do not see the archetypal forces belonging to the higher level in the world of thought, which can change this shadow without a moment's notice. Therefore, the clairvoyant student must note that the ego itself, as a thinking and willing being in the mental world, can alter or cancel any image seen in the reflecting ether, but it does so not by attacking the ambient matter, but by treating, through spiritual force and understanding, the creative idea behind the image, which is a property of the abstract world of thought, the home of the human spirit. There are many interesting stories of people who have had flash dreams of images of future events, generally those about to happen. Sometimes they have been warnings of danger, and acting accordingly has saved the clairvoyant's life. But in a great number of cases, the images are not clear or complete enough for the clairvoyant to trace a course of action, and sometimes they show circumstances over which the clairvoyant has no control. In such cases, it is good to remember that the real seat of control is in the archetypal world of thought, from which the ego works with the subtle forces of nature and controls every situation in harmony with the cosmic law. The ego can control, and indeed does, events that are at the point of materialization, and which are therefore visible as images in the reflecting ether. This is because it is through the positive pole of this ether that thought makes its impression on the brain. But let no one be disturbed by the prophecies of clairvoyance or their own images and flash dreams, because these belong only to the reflecting ether, and may be related to the spiritual forces in the world of origin of the ego itself, where the risks of power lie. Now, how is this done? First, Max Heindel says in Volume 1, Quanda, pages 113 to 114, that memory is of three types. The first is the record made by our senses. These impressions are engraved in the cells of the brain, and we are able to recall them consciously. However, this memory is very unreliable and capricious. If this were the only method for obtaining a record of our lives, the law of cause and effect would be invalid, and our lives would not be a sequence of what we have done or failed to do in the past. There must be another type of memory, and this is what scientists have called the subconscious mind. Just as the ether carries a photographer's chamber, a record of the surrounding landscape, and imprints it on the sensitive plate down to the finest detail, so the same ether that carries an image to our eye and imprints it on the retina also carries to our lungs a similar image, which is then revived by the blood. And as the blood passes through the heart, this record is indelibly inscribed in the sensitive seed atom located in the left ventricle of the heart near its apex. The soul forces of this seed atom are drawn out by the spirit at the moment of death and contain the record of the entire life, down to the smallest detail, so that regardless of whether we observe the events in a given scene or not, they are nevertheless present. We can add that the third type of memory is the superconscious memory, found in the world of life spirit, which is the Christ consciousness. As Max Heindel has said, every atom in the body has a light film and reflecting ether. One sees that this must collectively form an envelope or aura. As the ego evolves toward greater spirituality, it increasingly relies on cosmic light and reflecting ethers, and the film surrounding the atoms grows and expands until it envelops the entire body in an extensive aura with very special properties and powers, the golden wedding garment of the initiate. The permanent record of the seed atom goes with the ego from life to life, but the reflecting ether film in each atom carries a record pertaining to the present life in the body, moment to moment, until death. All of this is focused on the permanent record of the seed atom, carried from life to life. There is only a small amount of the two upper ethers in the average human organism, and this is mainly found in the blood, brain, and nervous system. It is precisely the expansion of the aura of light and the reflecting ether that produces a stronger and more extensive memory, more capable of focusing the images of the planetary memory of nature, as well as the seed atom of the heart. Medieval philosophers made the surprising deduction that memory was not part of the mind, just as we now say it belongs to the subconscious, from where it can be called voluntarily or involuntarily. Or, as Max Heindel explains in his analogy of the camera, the images of the luminous ether are focused on the film, which is the reflecting ether and the permanent record of the seed atom. Since the luminous ether and space are almost synonymous, we see that the pictures of space imprint their images on the film of the reflecting ether, flowing in two directions, one toward the past and the other toward the future. The reflecting ether and the records of past incarnations. The reflecting ether not only contains records related to everyday life, but it also contains records of the hours spent in sleep, which, in the case of the occultist, are hours of great activity. Few students remember the activities of the nighttime hours when, as invisible helpers, they are working or studying in the spiritual worlds. The invisible helpers can choose their actions, and while all show an interest in the work of healing, some also have other fields of activity. They attend classes and are also given the opportunity to visit the regions of purgatory and the first heaven to observe the conditions there. Even after the first initiation, Max Heindel said, their memory was still imperfect and required more training. Psychologists once spoke of people with a visual mind, an auditory mind, or abstract thinkers, as we might call the third group, who could remember without images of any kind. Incredible as it may seem to most people, there are those who can tell exactly what they had for breakfast, describe everything on the table, and yet insist that they do not see any images. Perhaps this type of image-free memory belongs to the mathematical mind, which is accustomed to thinking without images, except for mathematical formulas. The occult student who begins to awaken in the inner planes shows similar differences in memory and recall, which are undoubtedly due to such differences in mental habit and temperament. Some may say to themselves, "Last night I was at such and such a place and spoke with so-and-so." However, if asked to describe the scene or the person, They cannot, as they have no image in their mind related to the situation. Perhaps in daily life they have the same type of image-free memory. To improve memory, it may be necessary to practice constructing images in the mind, something the student must do every morning upon awakening. If the student has an auditory mind, if their auditory responses are sharp, they will likely remember words and speeches more vividly than images. If they have a visual mind, and their most prominent responsibility is visual, they will bring to memory landscapes, objects, and people. Clearly, people engaged in art are largely visual, while musicians and speakers are auditory. But those who say they remember experiences without images, whether visual or auditory, are also providing a true account of a memory. Recent psychological experiments conducted in various universities have suggested that forgetting occurs as a result of interference from various memory systems whose images or elements are very similar. This is the opposite of the popular belief that one remembers things more easily when they are similar. In the case of memories from the inner plane, unusual events are the ones that are most easily remembered, but the continuous life of study and work, night after night, is largely forgotten because it resembles our daily activities in many respects. Along with the ability to remember experiences from the inner planes in which the spirit functions during the body's sleep, provided of course that it has higher interests than those of the body, comes the ability to see the images at the negative pole of the reflecting ether related to past incarnations. We are told that these records, in a manner not yet definable in scientific terms, are imprinted in the seed atom of the heart and carried from life to life. These records of the seed atom are among those reflected in the negative pole of the reflecting ether, which the student often sees before falling asleep and before waking up in the morning. Psychologists call them hypnagogic visions, visions cast from the subconscious during sleep or almost in sleep. As they come during sleep, like dreams, the student is unable to exert real control over them. However, as the soul's consciousness increases, control is acquired. Most of the trance vision belongs to the realm of hypnagogic vision, but in the higher order of clairvoyance, the person is fully awake. However, they relax into complete stillness through an act of will and then see these so-called hypnotic visions in full wakeful consciousness and learn to control and direct them. Due to the need for complete relaxation, most occult schools in the past were located in secluded places, at mountain tops, deep in forests, or in desert areas where the air was clear and pure and only the sounds of nature were present. Evidently, when students trained in these peaceful places would go out to the noisy streets of towns and cities, they tended to lose the faculties they had worked so hard to acquire and had to learn to concentrate amidst noise and confusion. The Western Mystery School of the Rosicrucians has seen and solved this problem. Its training is designed for city dwellers, and although it may seem to the student that their progress is slow, they would find, if they withdrew to some quiet spiritual refuge in the countryside, that they have actually acquired more power than they had realized, and would compare favorably with the students living there who were trained in solitude. One must not think that the sleeping vision is transferred to the waking state. What we mean is that the state of sleep gradually clears or becomes impregnated with the waking consciousness. This waking consciousness then encompasses both the sleeping and waking hours, as well as the intermediate zones where hypnagogic visions occur. In this clarified or clear state, the clairvoyant student reads in the negative pole of the reflecting ether, and sometimes within that ether they will see images of past incarnations, both their own and others. There are certain important points to observe in relation to these visions in the reflecting ether. First, the known characteristics of this ether. To transpose some of the images, as in the case of Blavatsky, who read a page number backward, the analogy of the mirror should not be taken too far, because after all, the reflecting ether is not a physical mirror. It is a four-dimensional mirror in which the three dimensions of space are experienced by consciousness as a reflection. This means that, unlike the image in the mirror, which never mixes with our physical beings but remains separate, we seem to be drawn into the reflecting ether so that we find ourselves in the midst of the events being shown there. At first, the images pass quickly, like moving pictures that are unfamiliar on a theater screen. The student will eventually realize that they have entered the scene being shown, and it is likely that they will assume they are seeing an image of their own past incarnation, which is usually true. The first images seen are often those belonging to our own past incarnations. However, it is possible that we may not recognize ourselves in a scene with many people, where our sympathy is directed towards some character. Inevitably, the clairvoyant student will identify with the character they feel the most sympathy for, because through the reflecting power of the ether, they have actually entered into the emotional pattern of the character they are seeing. Thus, several women wrote to Arthur Wegg, the Egyptologist, thanking him for his kind treatment of Cleopatra's history, claiming they had been her in previous incarnations. How could these various women believe they had been Cleopatra? Obviously, they had seen visions of Egypt, in which Cleopatra held a central place and had felt a powerful emotional identity with the unfortunate queen. We can suppose that the clairvoyants were people who had indeed lived in Egypt and had known Cleopatra. They may have been court servants or ladies-in-waiting, friends of the queen, or even her most sincere enemies who worked to provoke her downfall and death, and who, in purgatory between incarnations, had entered into her suffering and learned to repent of their wickedness. Now, in their present incarnation, when they finally entered the day of initiation, the past opened its doors and showed them the place where they had committed much karma. They were not only amidst the scenes of Cleopatra's time, but also in the emotional waves that arose in her court, of which she was the pivot and center. Each of the clairvoyants, evidently out of personal vanity and perhaps also because they were hungry for emotions, quickly decided that they themselves were Cleopatra reincarnated. Thus, we see that there is a memory of emotion as well as a memory of thought and action, and this is also touched upon in the clairvoyance of the reflecting ether, although this emotional memory is, for most people, more rarely experienced than the other. However, when the image of the past is not merely seen but entered into in the described way, emotional memory comes into play. Now, since most of us identify more with our emotions and feelings than with bodily sensations or thought, it is natural that when we feel a strong emotion emanating from an illustrated character, we assume an identity that is not really our own. And so, ridiculous situations arise, like those of the various women who believed they were Cleopatra. The reflecting ether and its relationship to matter. Observe that every object in the outer universe has its clear and unmistakable replica in the reflecting ether. It is not only the body of the soul or the golden wedding garment that is found there. Everything in the universe has its reflection in this ether. However, the laws of reflection in the hyper-ether are not a simple mirror image, although this is the analogy upon which teachers base their explanations. We suggest that the most recent theories of science about matter and antimatter revolve around this ether, and that, since antimatter has anti-gravity, one could read here a possible explanation for the old saying that levitation is achieved through astral light. According to a current theory, in the beginning, matter and antimatter existed together in a kind of cosmic egg and were separated by some kind of unknown repulsive force. Max Heindel has said that levitation is accomplished by the inversion of the polarity of atoms, the proposition that the negative pole of the reflecting ether could constitute the great negative mass underlying the space-time continuum, of which modern science is beginning to be aware, may come as a shock to students who have not realized how closely physics has approached metaphysics. Max Heindel often speaks of interplanetary ethers, the main ones being the ethers of light and the reflecting ethers. The interplanetary light ether in particular, he associates with the cosmic Christ or solar logos. But just as matter truly extends throughout the universe in interplanetary and interstellar space, with atoms of matter in every cubic meter of cosmic space, the space is not empty. So too are the ethers present, and each planet specializes in its own field in which the evolution of the vital wave belonging to that planet proceeds. Many of the so-called illusions of matter are indirectly due to the properties of the reflecting ether, which has been called the mirror of the gods. The three lower ethers are active within the confines of the reflecting ether. In fact, we can think that each ether, starting with the higher one, surrounds or encloses a physical organism. For example, the ego imprints thought onto the brain through the positive pole of the reflecting ether. We now know that the processes of thought and memory of the incarnated ego not only have the electromagnetic correlations of the ethers of light and life, but also the purely chemical correlations of the chemical ether. There is a chemistry of memory and a chemistry of thought, just as there are electromagnetic patterns and forces in the brain and nerves that transmit the impulses of thought to the body and carry the sensory impressions of the body to the brain. Certain forces in the ether of light flow in response to the thought impulse focused by the ego at the positive pole of the reflecting ether, where the form of thought moves toward the chemical action, passing downward, outward through the electromagnetic spectrum and the ether of light. Some biologists have already formulated the theory that electrical currents in the voluntary nervous system actually exit from the brain where they are generated. The occultist points out that the ego is centered in the brain. Max Heindel speaks of the great waves of energy that emanate from the brain when the ego desires action in the body. Thus, the biologist states, there is an intricate chemical basis for how people remember and why they forget. Experiments have demonstrated that learning is reflected in changes in the cellular production of nucleic acid RNA, but how RNA is modified is still unknown. However, it is known that the learning process is accompanied by fundamental changes in the composition of this complex chemical. Since RNA molecules instruct the cells on which proteins to manufacture, changes in the RNA structures would lead to changes in protein production. Apparently, these proteins form the chemical basis of thought. Again, a scientific writer comments on the enormity of the task of mechanizing and electrifying brain power, as illustrated by the fact that the human brain contains about 10 million nerve cells. We do not know how it translates nerve impulses into sight, sound, or touch, nor how it stores and retrieves vast amounts of knowledge. The occultist classifies brain power and nerve impulses into the luminous ether, the storage and retrieval of knowledge in the reflective ether, the vital ether supplying the life force that keeps tissues and cells alive and growing, and the chemical ether as the field in which atoms and molecules are magnetically cemented into evolutionary patterns. Once again, Max Heindel comments on the fluid of life of the sun that charges the chemical and life ethers, and once charged preserves the individual through assimilation and perpetuates the race through fertilization. Since the reflective ether's vision does not depend on the optic nerve, physically blind people can learn to see in this ether, and not only see images of the inner plane, but also those of the physical plane. If this seems a poor substitute for physical sight, consider that normally no one looks directly at the physical world. Normally we only see the image that reaches the retina of the eye, which is then translated into nerve impulses. These in turn pass to the brain's optical center, where somehow the nerve impulses are translated back into the image and interpreted by the ego. And where does this translation take place, if not in the reflective ether? This interpenetrating body, as yet undiscovered, enables man to evolve. The DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, that embodies this mechanism, the genetic code of all living organisms except blood and some viruses, is made up of 4 chemical bases: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. It is the different combinations of these 4 chemicals that provide the specific information used by cells in the construction of proteins. It is this DNA that is molded by evolution. There is a constant competition for survival between these combinations, and thus organisms gradually become enriched with experiences that facilitate survival. No one has discovered a complete sequence of these different combinations from a single gene. Now we leave the field of the generalities of epigenesis and philosophy and enter the laboratory of the alchemist, where our ancient alchemists with their 4 basic elements would feel at home. Rays of the Rosicrucian Cross, November 1963, p. 516. Without the reflective ether, the ego could not express consciousness in the physical body. That is, it could not be conscious in the physical world. The philosopher of modern science, Owen Schrader, suggests that consciousness plays the role of a tutor. It supervises our education, introduces us to new experiences, but leaves us to follow our old routines in the form of habits, which are related to the negative pole of the reflecting ether. Consciousness deals with the process of learning and is intimately associated with everything new, that is, with new experiences and creativity, the epigenesis, the forces of the positive pole, in one word, the future. Occultists have long recognized that phosphorus is important for the thinking process. Max Heindel says that phosphorus is the particular element through which the ego is able to express thought and influence the dense body. The degree of consciousness and intelligence is proportional to the amount of phosphorus contained in the brain. The soul's growth allows the brain to assimilate an increasing amount of phosphorus, which is a chemical poison. The term astral light is, as is well known, not an Orientalism, but was used by ancient Western masters in reference to the soul body of the stellar type and its aura. For Celso, it refers to it as the sidereal light. The words of the great Paracelsus are very significant. The hidden things of the soul, which cannot be perceived by the physical senses, can be found through the stellar body, through whose organism we can look into the nature of things, just as the sun shines through glass. Therefore, the internal nature of everything can be known through magic in general and through the powers of internal sight or second sight. In Rosicrucian philosophy, the descriptive term reflecting ether is used instead of astral light. The latter term includes both the ether of light and the reflecting ether. We consider it important that both Eastern and medieval European occultists have stated that heavy bodies can be promoted by other supersensory powers. We can study the various chemical and electromagnetic properties and processes of the body, either individually or collectively, but the root of the mystery is found in no other place than in the reflecting ether, in the negative pole, which is the cosmic reflector, and in the positive pole, which projects the archetypal image that works creatively and represents the future. In this final chapter on the reflecting ether, we return to Max Heindel's assertion that this ether is the medium through which thought makes an impression on the human brain. It is most intimately related to the fourth subdivision of the world of thought. This is the highest of the four subdivisions contained in the region of concrete thought and is the home of the human mind. There is a much clearer version of the memory of nature found there. The fourth subdivision of the region of concrete thought is called the region of archetypal forces, Cosmo, pages 50-63. Let us delve into what we have been taught about this region in order to gain a clearer understanding of the reflecting ether, for it is the record of this region that is reflected downward into the reflecting ether. The cosmic relationship between the world of thought and the reflecting ether has its microcosmic counterpart within the aura of the embodied human being. The records of the memory of nature are contained in the negative pole of the reflecting ether, as is individual memory. However, the ego directs its positive thought force toward the brain through the positive pole of the reflecting ether. This positive thought force, which works through the positive pole of the reflecting ether in the brain and nervous system, is creative. It is not passively receptive. The negative pole is the receptor and thus contains memory, serving as the storehouse of all images, as has been described thus far regarding the region of archetypal forces. Max Heindel writes that it is the central and most important region of the 5 worlds in which all human evolution takes place. On one side of this region lie the 3 higher regions of the world of thought, the world of vital spirit and the world of divine spirit. On the other side of the region of archetypal forces are the 3 lower regions of the world of thought, the world of desire and the physical world. Thus this region becomes a kind of knot, bordered on one side by the realms of spirit and on the other by the worlds of form. It is a focal point where spirit is reflected in matter, Cosmo Conception, pages 50 and 51. Elsewhere, Mr. Heindel points out that from another point of view, the world of spirit properly begins with the world of vital spirit, which he calls the first universal world. He states that, in a broad sense, the material universe begins with the region of abstract thought, and above this, everything is pure spirit. The world of abstract thought is chaos, the seedbed of the cosmos, where germinal ideas, the seeds of all causality and thus of evolution, are created by the spiritual intelligences of that world. In Cosmo Conception, page 52, a schematic drawing is provided to understand the relative permanence of visible and invisible worlds based on the analogy of stereopsis projection. The diagram is drawn from the perspective of the Virgin Spirit, whose will corresponds to the operator of the stereopticon machine, which conceives in the world of vital spirit through divine creative imagination a concept. This concept takes the form of an idea in the region of abstract thought, and the idea is placed before the lens of the mind in the 4th subdivision of the world of thought. This 4th division is the only one that is properly and scientifically designated as the mind. The mind is the lens, but the light emanates from the vital spirit, while the slide represents the permanent idea created by the Virgin Spirit in the region of abstract thought. That is, This permanent idea is called the germinal idea, because it is the seed from which the objects of the outer world spring. The light of the vital spirit projects the living and permanent idea through the mind, which is specifically located in the region of archetypal forces. Therefore, these archetypal forces are those that, from this point onward, are represented by the rays of light emanating from the world of vital spirit. The archetypal forces descend through the region of concrete thought and the world of desire, awakening the driving force of desire and the corresponding image, which is projected on the screen by the stereoscopic projector. The archetypes are all living beings working on the archetypes in the second heaven, whose archetypes are forms of thought. These include humans between incarnations, the forces of nature, and celestial hierarchies such as the lords of the mind, archangels, angels, advanced members of our own mercurial Venusian vital wave, etc., and the adepts of our own humanity. Now, when we reach the physical world where the image becomes objective, we are shown 7 subdivisions, of which the 4 upper ones are the ethers, which are the subject of these chapters. Of these 4 ethers, the reflecting ether is the highest. According to Max Heindel, it is a hyperether. This ether is the screen upon which the image of the mind is projected. But the forces of the world of desire are present with the image, just as the heat, light, and electricity of the stereopticon machine are present with the image inscribed on the glass slide on the screen. Another analogy is the moving image projected from the film strip. However, the projected image from the stereoscopic machine is flat and 2-dimensional, while the projected image within the reflecting ether is 3-dimensional. It projects in depth and with life and force. The memory of nature and the human mind is comparable to this analogy, with art galleries and newspapers carrying pictures and symbols. But these are only a part of the physical world in its entirety. The so-called continuous space-time of modern physical science, the space-time continuum as a whole, correlates with the reflecting ether, and thus modern scientists speak of time travel, or the annihilation or collapse of space and the collapse of time, where the occultist says that they read in the memory of nature. In particular, the reflecting ether, under the scientist's perspective, they say they travel through time. Many science fiction fantasies depict this time travel as if it were possible for a person living in the 20th century to return to an earlier time and way of life while retaining their current personality and knowledge. The occultist questions such an inversion of the temporal current. In fact, in the course of their initiations, they travel backward in consciousness, where they review and recall their previous existences, not only their incarnations as human beings in the earthly period, but also their previous existences as animal, planetary, or even mineral beings from earlier periods of evolution. But while those periods were lived without self-consciousness, the initiate now sees them and enters into them with sympathy or empathy, empathetically in full self-consciousness, awake. By doing so, they become capable of using the forces that were once used involuntarily, guidance under the negative pole or passively, under the guidance of higher spiritual beings. Now, just as the physical body of man is surrounded by the world around him and derived from it, so too the divine spirit and the vital spirit are surrounded by their corresponding worlds, the macrocosms of spirit, and are derived from them. Similarly, the human spirit is differentiated within the world of abstract thought, and the mind and body of desires are differentiated from their corresponding worlds. While the vital body is composed of the ethers that surround it on all sides, the physical body is formed from physical substances, as has been said. However, from another point of view, we can say that the universe consists solely of spirit, the divine spirit that is reflected or condensed in the physical body as its representative, the vital spirit that is reflected or condensed in the vital body as its representative, the human spirit that is reflected or condensed in the body of desires and concrete mind as its double representative. But as we see, by a process of elimination, it is the mind itself that is the focus, the condensation, or the reflection of the pure virgin spirit. And the reflecting ether is, so to speak, a kind of lower polarity or octave of the mind, the subconscious mind in the sense that it occupies a lower plane than the true mind. Calling the reflecting ether the lower octave of the mind is, of course, a musical analogy, but such an analogy has a high degree of accuracy regarding the world of thought, because that world is the great cosmic world of tone or sound. Each cosmic sound pattern created in the cosmic root substance by a creative idea sent by the triple spirit in the form shown in Diagram 1 of Cosmoconception, the archetype of the world, sings a song that emanates from the solar logos and the great spirits before their throne, who are the planetary lords, and man, as a virgin spirit, is part of this song, and also sings along with the innumerable spirits of the celestial hierarchies. It is known by musicians and physicists who have developed a science of sound that when a certain note is played, for example on a piano, other harmonized keys vibrate in sympathy, creating overtones, undertones, chords, and octaves, as the case may be. See Cosmoconception, pages 122, 123. Thus, the harmony of the triple spirit sounds, and as it sounds, it creates tone patterns in the world of concrete thought that are translated into form and substance in the physical world. Therefore, it is said that the reflecting ether is the lower octave of the fourth or archetypal region of the world of thought, and therefore it reflects or summarizes with the images of the memory of nature and all other forces belonging to that high realm, the reality perceived by the senses. This reality is barely the shell of a vaster and unfathomable structure. Between the folds of the tangible, a network of vibrations, forces, and subtle manifestations unfolds that have remained invisible to the uninitiated eye, but the ignorance of their existence does not negate their influence. The ether in its many manifestations has always been the fabric upon which life manifests, the primordial substance that gives form and continuity to all that is. This knowledge, once reserved for initiates of mystery schools in ancient times, now resurfaces as an urgent necessity. It is not a mere metaphysical curiosity, but an adjustment of perception that will mark the destiny of humanity in the new age. As cosmic energies alter the vibratory field of the planet, the etheric vision, once the privilege of a few, begins to insinuate itself into the collective consciousness. Those who are prepared will recognize the signs, the subtlety of vital emanations, the interpenetration of planes, the latent presence of other forms of existence. But vision brings with it responsibility. It is not enough to see. It is necessary to understand, and not just to understand, but it is imperative to transform. Those who develop the perception of subtle worlds face an irreversible threshold, the impossibility of continuing to live with the same deceptions, the same fragile certainties, the same illusions of a separate and static existence. The etheric vision unveils the truth of what we are: consciousness in perpetual interaction, energy in motion, sparks of a cosmic intelligence that folds and unfolds in infinite cycles. Is humanity capable of holding the gaze before this revelation, or will it plunge into fear, denying what has always been evident to the awakened soul? Each era has had its veil to be lifted, its shadow to dissipate. Ours is the age of hidden light, the age of the fading opacity. Soon nothing will be able to remain hidden, not poisoned thoughts, nor twisted intentions, nor the true essence of those who have walked in darkness. Humanity stands at the edge of a metamorphosis. At this threshold, there is no turning back. Those who have read these pages with an open soul have already taken the first step. It is not about blind devotion or groundless faith. It is a call to awaken, an invitation to cross the threshold with the certainty that what awaits on the other side is not an abyss, but the fullness of knowledge. For the etheric light not only reveals what is, it also reveals what we can become. Throughout these pages, a knowledge has been unveiled that transcends the limits of ordinary perception. The etheric vision is not a mere extrasensory ability nor an isolated mystical phenomenon, but a door to a profound understanding of the hidden structure of existence. Its development not only expands the perception of the physical world, but also transforms the way consciousness relates to reality. The ether, in its many manifestations, is the bridge between the visible and the invisible, between matter and energy, between the finite and the eternal. Its study is not a theoretical exercise, but an awakening that carries profound implications. To know its principles is to enter into the true anatomy of the universe and of one's own being, understanding that life is not just what we see, but a constant flow of interconnected energies. Humanity finds itself at a point of transition. The entry into the age of Aquarius brings with it a change in the vibratory frequency of the planet, allowing faculties previously reserved for a few to begin to manifest naturally in those who have fine-tuned their perception. This transformation is not accidental nor arbitrary. It is an imminent evolution that requires preparation and understanding. But with knowledge comes responsibility. To perceive beyond the veil means acting with greater awareness, abandoning the dogmas of blind materialism and adopting a higher vision of existence. The revelation of the subtle worlds is not a destination, but a beginning. It is not enough to see, it is necessary to understand, and it is not enough to understand. It is imperative to live in harmony with what has been revealed. The teachings in this book are not a conclusion, but a starting point. Each reader, according to their degree of development and openness, will take from them what they are prepared to assimilate. But once the inner eye has begun to open, the quest no longer stops. The etheric vision is only the beginning of a path that leads to the knowledge of even higher realities. The true journey has barely begun.